Chapter 457. With that pleasant voice, a figure flapping its wings landed in front of Wuming. She was wearing the same clothes as the other skywings, with socks of different lengths and colors. She was even wearing only one shoe. She had a long hem and a pair of small wings at her waist, which made one wonder if she could fly. She had orange eyes that leaned toward gold, and her eyes were filled with death. She had long pink hair that glowed with fluorescent light, and a halo that resembled a magic array on one side of her head, making her look extremely mysterious. Wuming could not help but sigh in admiration. They really were sisters. Azriel's clothes were similar to the girls', and aside from her heterochromatic eyes, her hair color being different from the girls', her halo being more complicated, and her face being a little different, Wuming would believe that the two of them were sisters. On the other hand, because the other skywings had always been in the shape of children, Wuming could not tell how similar they were. Thus, Wuming chose a skywing that was the same size as Azriel, and he began to compare them. However, there were a few things that caught Wuming's attention. The skywing girl's figure was as graceful as an angel's, but her eyes were as cruel as a demon's, and her entire body reeked of blood. Although the skywings were all 16 or 17-year-old girls, because of the war, they were filled with ruthlessness and death, and Azriel was no exception. However, the skywing in front of Wuming had a more ruthless and bloodthirsty aura than the other skywings. She was undoubtedly known as a god-slaying weapon. Wuming looked into her eyes. Although she was smiling, the death in her eyes was no less than the other skywings. In fact, the other skywings could not even catch up to her. This was an extremely dangerous fellow, more dangerous than any of the skywing species present. This was Wuming's conclusion. Even more interesting was that she did not have the body of a child like the other skywings. Instead, she had the body of a normal girl like Azriel. "Little G, why are you only back now? Where did you run off to earlier, meow?" Azriel had a look of exasperation on her face as she spoke to the skywing girl known as Little G. "I was attracted by the battle between Lord Arthas and Lord Wuming then. I was sent flying by the shock waves of the battle. I happened to meet a strange human with a broken arm, so I played with him a little." The girl called Koji smiled sweetly at Azriel. Wuming, on the other hand, found some clues from these words. Based on her words, Wuming could tell that she had been drawn over while Wuming and Arthas were fighting. This meant that she had spatial abilities that surpassed other skywing species. Otherwise, she would not have noticed the fight between Wuming and Arthas. Afterward, she might have been sent flying by the shock waves of the spatial explosion, which was why she did not follow Azriel and the others to find Wuming. Furthermore, Wuming could sense that this skywing was much stronger than Azriel's. Furthermore, this skywing did not have the slightest hint of violence. Furthermore, this skywing was able to leave Abantiheim on her own accord. Furthermore, this skywing had not transformed due to exhaustion. There was no doubt that this skywing was unique. Lord Wuming, she is Gabriel, the final skywing species created by Lord Arthas. She is the final product of an alien being. It can be said that she is stronger than any of us skywings, and there is an example of her single-handedly conquering a superior race. Wuming immediately understood. It was no wonder she was so special. It turned out that she was an alien being created by Arthas. Under normal circumstances, the first and last products were both special. As the first product, Azriel had the authority to command the skywings, while Gabriel, as the final product of an alien being, had the greatest strength. However, the fact that her body had not changed caused Wuming to misunderstand. Why was Gabriel called an alien being? It was because she was an alien being. As god-slaying weapons, the skywings naturally had strict team assignments. Meanwhile, Gabriel did not have a team and acted alone. It was very likely because of this that Gabriel did not participate in the release of Pseudo-Godstrike. However, this did not surprise Wuming. Gabriel's lack of participation was very likely due to Azriel's orders. No matter how stupid Azriel was, She would not let all the skywings fall into a weakened state. Gabriel was the backup plan that Azrael had left behind. Wuming's guess was not wrong. Due to Gabriel's stubbornness, she left Abantiheim, and Azrael could no longer care about Gabriel. She brought Abantiheim and all the skywings to Wuming. After that, Gabriel found Abantiheim and returned. Wuming did not think that Gabriel did not know about Arthas' death, but from her expression and aura, as well as the emotions she displayed, Gabriel did not seem too sad. However, Wuming did not pay attention to that. What Gabriel had just said concerned Wuming. You said that you met a human with a severed arm. Where is he? Wuming looked at Gabriel solemnly. Unsurprisingly, the human with a severed arm that Gabriel had met was Rick. Wuming had sent Rick directly to Lucia. Only the heavens knew how Gabriel had managed to get there. Even if she had been affected by Wuming and Arthas' spatial oscillation, could she have made it that far? The reason was simple. Gabriel had wanted to use her spatial ability to enter the space where Wuming and Arthas had fought, which was Arthas' war god shrine. However, a spatial explosion had happened at that time, and due to the instability of space, Gabriel had been sent away by the spatial oscillation. She should be considered lucky, but she had made it in time for Wuming and Arthas' spatial oscillation. She should be considered unlucky, but she had run into Rick, who had been sent away by Wuming. As the most god-slaying skywings, what they loved to do the most was collect the heads of various races as spoils of war. They would not let their enemies off just because they were weak or strong. That was why Wuming was a little worried that Gabriel would make a move on Rick. Gabriel smiled sweetly at Wuming and explained, Wuming. Don't worry, Lord Wuming. Because he has the aura of your power on him, I only teased him a little and did not harm him. Indeed, Rick's severed right arm still had traces of mana leaked from Desireless arm. If not for a special method, it would take a few days for the residual mana to dissipate. Thank you for not attacking him. He's my friend. Wuming's tone relaxed, no longer feeling as oppressive as before. It's what I should do, Gabriel said gracefully. Gabriel then revealed a dangerous look. Then, Lord Wuming, let's talk about the contract. Chapter 458. For her to stand up at this time, there was no doubt that she had some objections to Wuming's contract. I heard that Sir Arthas has entrusted us to you. Since that's the case, I'll definitely abide by this rule. However, the contract you speak of isn't an ordinary one, Giliel continued in an elegant and pleasant voice. Giliel's meaning was very simple. A contract was not that simple. Please allow me to ask a question. If I sign a contract with you, will I truly become your subordinate? Giliel asked. Wuming naturally understood what Giliel meant. She wanted to ask whether this was a simple summoning contract or a true master-slave contract. If it was just a summoning contract, then the Skywings would only be summoned, but if it was a true master-slave contract, they might not even have the ability to resist after signing the contract. In serious cases, they might not even be able to commit suicide. However, the other Skywings did not seem to care about this. It was as if they were really weapons as they quietly listened to the conversation between Wuming and Giliel. It's not a summoning contract but a master-slave contract. I can summon you through this contract, and you can transfer your power to me. I can also bestow my power to you. Currently, I know of these abilities. Azrael is an example, Wuming calmly said. He then began to transfer his power to Azrael. Bang! As if she had been cast by a red devil, Azrael's body erupted with powerful magic, creating a whirlwind that engulfed the surroundings. That's truly powerful power, Giliel said with a smile when she sensed that Azrael's power had increased by a large margin. Giliel could sense that Azrael's power had vaguely surpassed hers. However, you can be at ease. The contract will only be effective on creatures that sincerely wish to submit to me. After signing the contract with me, although I can't directly kill you, I can still control you to a certain extent. Of course, if you feel that this contract is too overbearing, you can choose to refuse to sign the contract with me, Wu Ming explained to the Skywings once more. There's no need to say such things, Sir Wu Ming. The Skywing sisters will definitely obey Sir Arthas's orders and treat you as their new master, so they'll definitely agree to sign the contract with you, Giliel said with a smile. I'm only asking because I need confirmation. After all, I have to ensure the future of my clansmen. If I've offended you, please punish me. Seeing Giliel's apologetic look, Wu Ming simply waved his hand. There's no need for punishment. You're not wrong. Then, Sir Wu Ming, would you be willing to fight with me? As if she had already expected Wu Ming's answer, Giliel smiled and looked at Wu Ming. However, the ruthlessness and deathly aura in her eyes became even more intense. Wait a moment, little Giliel. How can you be so rude to Sir Wu Ming, meow? Azriel frowned and said. After being strengthened by Wu Ming's power, she appeared extremely dignified. If only I could get rid of that last quirk, Wu Ming laughed when he heard that. I'm afraid that you wanted to fight with me from the start, Giliel. Indeed, after saying so much, apart from confirming the future of the Skywings, Giliel actually wanted to fight with Wu Ming even more. Although it's a little rude, Sir Wu Ming, I won't lower myself to fight someone I don't agree with, even if it's you who defeated Sir Arthas. Instantly, Giliel's eyes were filled with killing intent. Giliel! Azriel roared at Giliel. This time, Azriel did not use her pet name of Little Giliel, or her quirk of meow. It could be said that Azriel was already angry. You're quite to my liking. Then, let's fight. Wu Ming also revealed a smile, as if his interest had been piqued, and he looked at Giliel wantonly. Azriel looked at Wu Ming with some surprise, clearly dissatisfied with Wu Ming's willful answer to Giliel's willful request. Then, Wu Ming's Giliel arrived at Wu Ming's inherent barrier. This planet that had already been pierced through could no longer withstand another wave of devastation, so Wu Ming chose his own inherent barrier. Because it was the ability of Anzavulga's staff, the first 8 layers that were destroyed had not yet recovered, unlike the ordinary inherent barrier, which would remain intact after the magician activated it again. Although the 9th and 10th layers were quite narrow, Giliel did not say anything. It was better to say that for Giliel, any kind of battlefield made no difference. While the Skywing species waited patiently, several minutes later, Silent Wonder came out of the inherent barrier with the miniature Gopril in hand. So fast, meow? Azriel had a surprised expression. This opportunity is really careless. She used all her energy to release Heavenly Strike after a few simple exchanges, so naturally it's going to end soon. After Wu Ming resisted Giliel's attack, Giliel, who had no energy left, could be said to have lost. I'm a little excited, but I didn't expect Wu Ming, Sama, to be able to resist my Heavenly Strike. Gopril, who was being carried by Silent, wasn't embarrassed at all. Instead, she smiled proudly, as if she had won the match. Although I can't use most of my powers, I can still use magic. When Giliel used Heavenly Strike, Wu Ming entered his magician avatar and used one sealing technique after another to directly seal Giliel's killing move. After all, in theory, in the face of a tsunami, you only need a flame countless times larger than a tsunami to evaporate the tsunami. Silent had made use of the principle of quantitative change leading to qualitative change. Relying on a magician's extraordinary use of magic sealing spells, he had sealed Jillian's moves. Fortunately, Giliel's Heavenly Strike was just a simple energy attack. If it was a noble phantasm, Wu Ming would not be able to seal it, at least not now. It's really annoying, meow. In short, Kitsune lost, meow. Azriel turned around, and her face instantly became like an idiot. However, because Giliel was being carried by Wu Ming, she did not see Azriel's face and said with a smile, "Ah, that's right. Wu Ming, Sama got my approval. Wu Ming, hurry up and let all of us Skywings sign the contract." Alright, let's do it as soon as possible. Wu-Ming also nodded. He had wasted too much time with the Skywings. However, Wu-Ming-sama, before that, can you give Kitsune to me for a while? Meow. Azrael turned around and looked at Gilia like an idiot. Hey? Senior Azrael, you're like this again. I don't want to be your pillow. Meow. Ha ha ha. It's still up to Master Wu-Ming. Meow. That's enough, you two. There are still so many people watching. Chapter 459. After that, Wu-Ming entered Vitality Incarnation and released his mana, enveloping all the Skywings. Immediately afterward, the Skywings returned to their girl forms at a speed visible to the naked eye, but thanks to that, Wu-Ming's Vitality Incarnation also entered a red alert state. After all, there were close to 10,000 Skywings. Fortunately, because it was not overloaded, the Vitality Incarnation was only used for a short period of time, so it would recover in a few days. After that, Wu-Ming also activated the contract ability of Dependence, and all the Skywings accepted the contract without hesitation, including Gapril. By the way, Abendheim also accepted Wu-Ming's contract and evolved into Wu-Ming's guardian beast. After all, which god didn't have a divine beast by his side? Just stay on Abent. In a few days this world will be brand new. Wu-Ming told the Skywings and was ready to leave. Is Master Wu-Ming going to see that human? Gapril suddenly asked. Yes, why? Do you want to go with me? Wu-Ming looked at Gapril. Yes, after all, it's too boring to stay here. Gapril smiled sweetly at Wu-Ming. However, this made Azrael feel helpless. Master Wu-Ming, if possible, I think it's better for you to take Gapril with you. First, she can't stay here, and second, with you taking a Skywing guard, you can let the other races know that you are our new master. Meow. In short, it was a declaration of sovereignty. After all, many races had lost their gods. In addition, the battle between Wu-Ming and Artesio must have attracted the attention of other races, and there must be some races who wanted to take the opportunity to join Wu-Ming. After all, almost no one knew that the Star Cup was already in Wu-Ming's hands. Many of those secluded clans did not really want to retire. If they won the Star Cup for their own gods, they would naturally rise in status. Who didn't want status and power? It was just that they couldn't fight anymore, so they had to withdraw from the war. If there was a new incomparably powerful god that was left alone, they would definitely not mind joining him or her, and starting to compete for the Star Cup again. I understand. Gapril, follow me. Yes, Master Wu-Ming, thank you very much. Because of Azrael's words, Wu-Ming was ready to take Gapril to a conspicuous place to show the sovereignty of the Skywings. Wu-Ming and Gapril flew in the sky at a leisurely pace. Master Wu-Ming, how different is your world from this world? Gapril suddenly asked. Wu-Ming glanced at Gapril and found that her eyes were filled with a thirst for knowledge. It was no wonder Gapril couldn't stay. How could she stay with such a strong thirst for knowledge? My world. You can say that it's completely different from this world, Wu-Ming said as he flew. Oh, then, can you tell me? Gapril's eyes shone like a wolf who had seen meat. Of course, no problem. Let's talk about language first. If not for my innate ability that allows me to communicate with people from different worlds without any obstacles, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to communicate with you. Wu-Ming had been to many places, but he had never encountered a language barrier. There was no doubt that this was a racial innate ability of the Origin Dragon. Now, Wu-Ming and Gapril were communicating in the language of the Skywings. Every time he came into contact with a new species, Wu-Ming could always subconsciously speak the language of that species and communicate with them. This could be said to be speaking the human language when you see the human, and the ghost when you see the ghost. After all, Wu-Ming was born from the origin that gave birth to countless worlds and countless origin dragons, so it was reasonable for him to have this ability. But Master Wu-Ming, you speak the language of the Skywings very fluently. Your innate ability is truly miraculous. In this world, because there were various gods, The creatures they created all had their own languages, including humans. Of course, there was also a common language of the continent that had come from who knew where, and it could be said that every species could understand it. Wu-Ming suspected that it was because of this planet. As long as one was a native of this planet, they would definitely be able to understand the common language of the continent. Then, is there a unified language in Master Wu-Ming's world? Gapril continued to ask. That's not the case. There are many countries and regions in my world. Just like this world, they were also invented by the races of each region. However, in my world, humans make up the majority, and other races are in the minority. Humans also have many races, Wu-Ming began to explain non-stop, telling Gapril about the world of Type Moon. Yellow skin, white skin, and black skin? Humans can use magic? Magic? Generally speaking, it's not much different from magic. True ancestors and death apostles. I didn't think that your world would have fantasy breeds. Is this a character named Rune? Indeed, I can feel the tremendous power contained within it. Not long after, Wu-Ming and Gapril came to an uninhabited forest. Along the way, Wu-Ming told Gapril many things, and Gapril listened very carefully to the stories that Wu-Ming told her. This greatly moved Wu-Ming, and he even displayed the Lune runes for Gapril to admire. After all, anyone would be happy to be able to listen to him so attentively. Just as Gapril was drooling like an idiot looking at the Lune runes that Wu-Ming drew in the air, she heard a bang, and the Lune runes all disappeared. Master Wu-Ming? Gapril looked at Wu-Ming with dissatisfaction. Without a doubt, Wu-Ming had put away the Lune runes. Alright, we're done with our stroll. It's time to get down to business. Wu-Ming would not forget about business just because he was having a good time chatting with Gapril. Yes. Then, Master Wu-Ming, you should have summoned me earlier, Hee. Gapril then turned into an idiot again, letting out an extremely idiotic sound. Yes, I got it. Wu-Ming bitterly smiled. He did not see any other skywing species being so curious. Could it be because Gapril was the final product? Wu-Ming even began to suspect that the skywing species that had robbed the old capital of the forest fairies and stolen all the grimoires was Gapril. Gapril's thirst for knowledge was truly too exuberant. Shaking his head, Wu-Ming no longer thought about this. He purposefully looked around before opening a teleportation gate and entering with Gapril. The spies of the other species hidden in the surroundings wiped off their cold sweat and quickly retreated. All sorts of probing spells were also dispelled. Chapter 460. In a cave, the water around him shimmered with the light of special ores. Rick was still wearing his tattered clothes from the forest god's attack. He sat on a stone bench uneasily. However, he was not alone. In this cave, there were other ghosts that Rick had chosen. Rick had asked them to rest in other caves. Rick wanted to be alone in this cave. They were all missing an arm or a leg, but fortunately, none of them were missing. Wu-Ming's potion was indeed effective. None of them were crippled or had their skin fester due to the black ash, but they were still missing an arm or a leg. The ghosts did not always apply the black ash. They only applied it when they arrived at their destination and began their mission. This meant that they did not have any black ash on them when they were on their way. Putting aside the demons hidden on the continent, there were also those who were alone or hidden in the path that the ghosts had to pass through. Any single person of another race who accidentally discovered the ghosts was enough to pose a fatal threat to the ghosts. Coupled with the dangerous environment, it was a miracle that the ghosts were only missing an arm or a leg. There were no casualties. This is the possibility of being human. However, in the face of absolute power, we humans are still too weak, Rick said self-deprecatingly when he thought of everyone's efforts. Rick had been returning to this stronghold ever since Wu-Ming teleported him back to Lucia. However, his luck was not good. He ran into a skywing on his way back. How is that possible? Aren't the Skywings at war with the forest goblins and goblins? Rick was dumbfounded. Without the black ash, the Skywings had long seen through his human identity. Now Rick was prepared to die. Oh, a special human! This feeling of facing death with equanimity. Are you prepared to die? As he had lost his right arm, Rick took out a dagger with his left hand and glared at the Skywing in front of him. Although Rick used his left hand to wield the dagger, it did not affect him much. To survive in such a world, it was necessary for both hands to master the way to use weapons. Not a bad eye. Looks like I'll have a decent spoil of war today. The Empyrean Wing smiled. As someone who was very familiar with other races, Rick naturally knew that the spoils of war the Skywings were talking about were the severed heads. Well, it just so happens that I have something to do right now. I'll put your head on your neck first. It was as if the Empyrean Wings were playing a prank on him. With a delighted smile, they took to the sky and left. Then Rick slumped to the ground. Although Rick didn't know why the other party had spared him, the most important thing was that he had survived. I wonder how the Willow is doing. Rick began to worry again. No matter how he looked at it, the person who had taken his arm was not someone to be trifled with. Not to mention, Wooming had called her the forest god Canas. Although he did not know if it was the real forest god Canas, Rick knew that the enemy was not to be trifled with. The Earth's core has indeed been pierced through, so the Star Cup should have been released as well. Then, the Earth's crust shook violently last night. Could it be that the gods were fighting for the Star Cup? Rick frowned. Rick saw the Earth's core being pierced through, but he did not see who had obtained the Star Cup. Therefore, Rick guessed that the Earth's crust shaking was caused by the gods fighting for the Star Cup. Rick's guess was not wrong. Wooming and the Star Cup's consciousness were indeed fighting for their lives. It was inevitable that whoever won would obtain the Star Cup. However, if you think about it carefully, this is also beneficial to humans. No matter which god gets the Star Cup, the war will naturally end. However, Rick immediately shook his head. A god who can't ensure the safety of humans, possessing the Star Cup is equivalent to giving humans an unprecedented disaster. Rick sighed helplessly. I can only rely on you, Lord God from another world. After all, Rick still dared to prance around under the eyes of a god, but Rick really did not dare to snatch something from a god. It should be said that he could not snatch it. Humans without power could only lead the war to an end. If humans really had the power to change the outcome of the war, then humans would not be where they were today. Then I'm really honored, Rick. Suddenly, Wooming's voice sounded in the cave. Lord God. Rick looked at the source of the voice excitedly, but his voice came to an abrupt stop. It was not because of Wooming, but because a Skywing species was following behind Wooming. Moreover, it was the Skywing species that had let him go. In an instant, countless questions arose in Rick's mind. Why would the Lord God have a Skywing species behind him? Wasn't the Skywing species a subordinate of the war god Arceus? Could it be that the Lord God and Arceus worked together? Many questions filled Rick's mind. Seeing Rick's eyes constantly changing, Wooming easily guessed his thoughts. Arceus is dead. I defeated him. Wooming's words shocked Rick. To be able to defeat the war god who was known as the strongest in this world, did that not mean that this Lord God from another world was even stronger than the war god? Then, the Skywing species behind you is... Rick looked at Jillian, who was still smiling. Now, the Skywing species has already defected to my command. These words made Rick lose his composure. Huh? Let's put it this way. Just treat it as my reward for defeating the final boss. Wooming smiled at Rick. How can there be such a reward for defeating the Demon King and subduing the Demon King's army? Rick roared angrily. Forget it. Let's not talk about this for now. Rick rubbed his head as if he had a headache, then looked seriously at Wooming. Star Cup. How is it? Hearing Rick's words, Wooming smiled, and then golden ripples appeared beside him. Seeing the golden ripples for the first time, Jillian showed interest and curiously stared at the golden ripples. Wuming reached his hand in, then out again. In an instant, the cave, which was originally extremely dark even with the light of the oars, became as bright as the outside. The reason was the cup-shaped object in Wuming's hand, which was emitting endless light. Without a doubt, this was the star cup. Jillian and Rick both looked at the cup in shock. This was the symbol of the planet's ownership. Although the two of them had no intention of becoming the planet's master, they could not help but care about the star cup. This thing was simply too beautiful. This was Rick's first thought. Rick was deeply immersed in the warm light of the star cup and did not speak for a long time. Chapter 461. So this is the star cup, Rick said in a confused manner. Yes, this is the source of the gods' dispute and war, the star cup. The entire planet was engulfed in the flames of war. Countless lives were lost. The sky lost its light and was shrouded in darkness. The ground was covered in black ash. The cause of all this was the beautiful little cup that was glowing in front of him. The ownership of the planet. The throne of the only god. Now, this war can finally end. Rick clenched his fist and lowered his head. A few drops of tears rolled down his cheeks as he spoke in a choked voice. Looking at Rick in this state, Wuming's Jillian seemed to have realized something. Her eyes were filled with thoughts. At the very least, you humans participated in ending this war. You were the victors from the beginning. Usually, only those who yearn for peace will get what they wish for in the end, Wuming said to Rick with a smile on his face. Also, I believe that even without me you can save this planet. The possibility of humans isn't some weak force. From the beginning, Wuming had sensed endless possibilities from Rick. The feeling that Rick could end the war even if he did not come to this world lingered in Wuming's heart. If Shiobi met Rick, he would most likely be influenced by Rick's inner feelings. With Rick's opportunity and the Kikai Seed's ability, the possibility of ending the war was quite high. Of course, since Wuming was here, he would naturally choose to help. Wuming was glad that he came. Otherwise, even if Rick's plan was perfect, he would still die in the end. The Star Cup did not allow non-gods to become the only god. Wu Ming could feel the rejection from the Star Cup towards Rick and Gopril. It was as if they would turn into ashes if they were to touch it. Wu Ming's hand was wrapped around it. Wu Ming, on the other hand, was judged as neutral by the Star Cup because of the Root Dragon's power. The Star Cup would not allow Wu Ming to become the only god, nor would it harm Wu Ming. It truly treated Wu Ming as neutral. But now, there's another big problem. Wu Ming smiled bitterly as he lifted the star-holding cup. Wu Ming started to explain when Gopril's big, curious eyes and Rick's teary eyes looked over. Because I'm not a native god of this world, the Star Cup doesn't recognize me, and the Star Cup can only be inherited by the gods. In other words, whether it's a creation of the gods or a human, they can't control the Star Cup. Wu Ming told them the bad news. Jillian wasn't moved. She wasn't interested in these things, and Rick's expression didn't change, much as though he had expected it. You don't seem surprised? Wu Ming asked. While I was waiting, I also guessed that humans might not be able to use the Star Cup. Furthermore, I didn't have any intention of obtaining the Star Cup, so I wasn't surprised, Rick said slowly. Besides, I originally wanted you to become the only god, although it's impossible now. Rick shook his head regretfully. The three fell into silence. Hey Rick, have you ever thought about how gods are born? Wu Ming suddenly asked. Facing Wu Ming's question, Rick didn't answer immediately. Instead, he began to ponder. My lord, isn't it because the elven corridor gave birth to a divine seed? Seeing that Rick didn't answer, Jillian spoke up. However, Wu Ming smiled and shook his head. Of course, Wu Ming wouldn't ask such a simple question. Otherwise, Rick wouldn't be deep in thought. What I mean is, why would the elven corridor give birth to a god? Is there a source beyond this? Jillian also fell into deep thought. She wasn't very interested in this kind of thing and had never thought about it before. She simply gave up after thinking about it for a while. If there were no god seeds, then there would only be one kind of creature in the world. Because only humans were born to live on this planet, the other creatures were all created by the god. Wuming's words gave Rick some idea. From what I know, every world has faith. If the gods rely on faith, they can become extremely powerful. Wuming began to tell the story. Faith can provide the gods with endless power. The more people believe in the gods, the more powerful the gods will be. However, once the believers disappear, the gods who rely on faith will instantly fall to the bottom. This was basically the reason why the gods in the Type Moon world retreated. People began to understand the magic that could only be used by the gods, and it was Solomon who created the magic. People began to understand mystery, no longer held reverence, no longer believed, and slowly began to believe in science. As for the gods, they can also be born from faith. Wuming's words shocked Jillian. My lord, do you mean that the divine seed is born from faith? Then, Jillian began to think. The divine seed was born from faith. If that was the case, before there were divine creations and gods, whose faith gave birth to the divine seed. Jillian looked at Rick. Without a doubt, the answer was humans. They had no power, no spirits in their bodies, and were extremely weak. However, they were able to play a role in ending this great war. Although in Jillian's eyes, humans were still insignificant, this war was just humans basking in her Lord's glory. You should have thought of it, Rick. The humans' faith gave birth to the gods, and the gods created various races. Wuming nodded, then looked at Rick. The forest god, the forge god, the war god, the doubt god, the ocean god. All the gods had their own duties. The war god was born from war, hatred, and blood. The forest god was born from nature, greenery, and plant. The ocean god was born from the ocean, various gods, and so on. Ah! Of course, I have thought of it. The thoughts of the foolish ancestors turned into a disaster for their descendants. How ironic! Rick clenched his fists tightly. At this point, he finally understood everything. Why were humans different? Why were humans without any special characteristics? Why were humans without gods? Why were humans so weak? It was all because there were only humans on this planet. Because of the human thoughts, this magical planet's mother gave birth to her younger brother in her own body. However, in the end, the younger brothers of the humans created various descendants, and the younger brothers ignored the humans as their elder brother in order to fight for the position of the family head. Or rather, they never thought of themselves as having an elder brother from the beginning. These humans were probably the servants of the family, the younger brothers thought. Then, the Earth's mother was scarred, and the only elder brother could not stand it anymore. He began his journey to end this farce of a family power struggle. What a crappy family drama, Wuming mocked. Then, Wuming looked at the disappointed Rick. Hey Rick, we need a new god, don't we? Another sentence made Rick realize something. You mean? Chapter 462. Relying on the faith of humans to give birth to another god? Rick naturally understood what Wuming meant. However, there was no god that could be born just like that. Even the other divine beings were born after who knows how many years. However, Wuming shook his head. Rick, you're underestimating yourself. You're the leader of humans, a special human who could attract my attention. Although the human leader's words were a little absolute since there was no telling if there were other humans in this world, Rick had indeed attracted Wuming's attention through the black origin mud in the Star Cup. It was because of his strong belief that Rick's voice could reach Wuming's ears through the black origin mud. Haven't you realized that there's a god like that beside you? Rick's pupils instantly contracted when he heard Wuming's words. The god of games. Rick remembered how he often played chess with that unknown existence when he was a child. Although Rick believed that the god of games existed, he didn't need to have such childish thoughts after becoming the leader of humans. Therefore, Rick never played chess again, nor did he tell anyone about the story of the god of games. It could be said that this was the first time Rick played chess with Shiobi and Wuming in the old capital of the Forest Elves. The god of games, huh? Although it doesn't sound very reliable, I'll leave it to you, this world. Wuming nodded and then threw the star cup behind Rick's back. Rick didn't react in time. When he saw Wuming casually throw the star cup, he didn't catch it. Gillyre didn't move either, and quietly watched Wuming's actions. The ruined star cup looked as fragile as glass, and it was thrown by Wuming just like that. Subsequently, the star cup did not fall to the ground as Rick had expected. The star cup floated firmly in the air as if it had been caught by someone. Then, a figure slowly appeared, turning from transparent to solid. This is... Rick stared at the scene in disbelief. She was wearing a green shirt, blue shorts, magenta shoes, and a jacket. There was a pink ribbon on the back of her jacket. She wore a checkered hat with a plum blossom logo printed on it. Under the hat, she had short white hair. Her cheeks were printed with hearts, and her left and right eyes had spades and diamonds respectively in her heterochromatic pupils. As expected of the god of games, his face, eyes, and even his hat were all pictures of poker cards, the god of games, a deity formed from your faith and your will. Wuming explained. I'm Tetu. The god of games held the celestial cup in his hand as he hovered in the air, greeting Rick, who was staring blankly at Tetu. The god of games, does it really exist? Rick was a little excited. Then, Wuming mercilessly slapped Tetu's face. At the same time, he is also the weakest god. Outside the cave, Wuming, Rick, Gillyre, and Tetu arrived. Ignoring the fact that Wuming said he was the weakest god, Rick was still a little excited. This was a god who existed by his own will. Although he was born by your will, Tetu is the weakest god because it is only your faith. Wuming explained as if he saw through Rick's thoughts. Although you're not wrong, can't you give me a little face? Tetu chuckled. Although Wuming said he was the weakest, Tetu didn't care, like an optimist. Although what Wuming said was the truth. Well then, I'll take my leave first, everyone. With that, Tetu flew into the sky. Tetu, who had ascended to the throne of the only god, was now preparing to repair this world. It couldn't be said that Tetu was trustworthy, but as a god born from Rick's faith alone, his way of thinking was still simpler than the other gods. At the very least, Tetu, who was born from Rick's faith, was trustworthy. Perhaps it was because his lifelong wish had been fulfilled, or for some other reason, but Rick was now staring blankly at Tetu, who was flying into the sky, as if he was possessed, without saying a word. At that moment, Gillyre spoke while Rick was still in a daze after Tetu left. My lord, are you really going to give the celestial cup to the weakest just like that? Gillyre was a skywing after all, and her mindset of respecting the strong wasn't that easy to change. Wuming, the strongest, had given the greatest spoils of war to the weakest, which made Gillyre very unhappy. But she had no choice. Since it was her master's will, she could only endure it. After all, I can't use it either, can I? I only have one goal, and that is to help the humans of this world. Although the god of games is the weakest god, Tetu's feelings for humans aren't weak. Wuming smiled as he explained to Gillyre while looking at the sky. Perhaps the mindset of respecting the strong has been deeply ingrained in your mind, but I still want to say that humans aren't weak. However, Gillyre still looked as if she didn't agree with that. Through the thoughts of humans, other gods were born. Are humans weak? Not at all. Gillyre then refuted Wuming's words. But even so, my lord, humans are on the brink of extinction in this war. This is a fact that you can't refute. Gillyre first bowed to Wuming to atone for her rebuttal, before continuing. Even so, in the end, the celestial cup was still obtained by a god born from the faith of humans. It can be said that humans have won this war. Wuming smiled. After all, the condition for humans to win was the end of the war, while the condition for other gods to win was to obtain the celestial cup. I defeated Arthas. This is the result. I am the victor. Now, humans are the victors, and the victors are the strong. Gillyre then fell silent. Humph. Whatever you say, my lord. As if throwing a tantrum, Gillyre snorted and didn't say anything else. Wooming looked at Gillyre with a bitter smile, then said with a smile, "Well, you still have a long way to go in terms of understanding humans. I'm not asking you to have any desire to protect humans, I just want you to acknowledge other races. The mindset of respecting the strong isn't suitable for you who are my guardians." "Yes, yes, my lord." After ending the conversation between master and servant, Wooming began to admire the reconstruction of this world. Not created by anyone, not expected by anyone, not prayed by anyone, Tetu's voice began to sound in the sky. The nameless race that evolved from beasts to bipedal walking with their own consciousness and obtained intelligence, humans. Tetu's voice wasn't loud, but it was as if the entire world could hear him. "For such a race, I, as the only God, grant you a name. Humanity, race of humans." The moment the humans were given their names, the sky of this planet lit up. The dark clouds all disappeared and the sun was exposed. Plants instantly covered the earth, butterflies fluttered among the flowers, and birds soared freely in the sky. The entire world seemed to be alive again. Not only that, but most of the terrain was also changed, and there were more chess pieces on the ground. Next, the exceed 16 races, who claim to have intelligence. You will swear to the covenant as your worship, abide by the rules of the Ten Covenants, and start a new game in this new world. Well then, let's continue the game. Listening to Tetu's speech, and looking at the land that was restored to life, Wooming smiled helplessly. Well done, but all I can say is that as expected of the god of games. So, my lord, do you want the celestial cup back? Gillyre egged him on. Well, looking at the tears of joy flowing out of Rick's eyes as he looked down at the land that was restored to life, Wooming turned to leave. "Since I'm not interested, I'll leave the rest to the players." Chapter 463. Wooming slowly walked on the land that was overflowing with life, admiring the scenery around him. The trees were lush, butterflies were dancing, and all kinds of small animals were coming and going. Birds were flying freely in the sky. Arriving at a highland, Wooming looked down at the plains in front of him and sighed. You don't say, controlling the Star Cup is really like controlling the ownership of a planet. In just an instant the entire planet changed. It was as if Tetu had entered an editing interface. He formatted the dying planet and gave it new life. At that moment Shiobi, who was following beside Wooming, spoke. "Shiobi, I like the current planet." Shiobi looked at the land in front of her with a happy expression. Wooming couldn't help but look at his sister who was smiling so innocently. After Tetu reorganized the world, he set the 10 covenants. Wooming didn't pay attention to the content of the covenants, only knowing that they were related to the game. Wooming couldn't help but complain about Tetu again, as expected of the god of games. In short, the entire world had become a world where everything was decided through the game. This way, humans wouldn't be deliberately harmed. After that, Rick brought the spirits back to the village. Seeing her brother return safely, Crone was so happy that she hugged her brother and cried for a while. Wooming, on the other hand, quietly cancelled his clone and came to the village. After all, in everyone's eyes, the siblings Villo and Shiobi had been staying in the village all this time. By the way, during the time he stayed in the village, Crone came to Wooming many times. Of course, it wasn't what you imagined. Crone came to Wooming to find out what her brother was doing. Of course, Wooming deliberately avoided this question every time. After some time, Crone gave up on getting information from Wooming and turned to Shiobi. After spending so much time together, Crone understood the relationship between Wooming and Shiobi. A kind and capable brother and a shy and innocent sister who always hid behind her brother. In Crone's impression, Shiobi and Wu-ming had never been separated and were always together. Therefore, Crone thought that Shiobi must know something about him. After all, she was a child and it was easy to get information from her. That was Crone's idea, but reality slapped her in the face. Shiobi, who had been instructed by Wu-ming, was naturally feigning ignorance and not telling Crone. Although Crone wasn't happy that she couldn't get anything out of Shiobi after half a day, thanks to this, her relationship with Shiobi, they were like sisters. Thanks to Crone, Wu-ming, but Shiobi. Even if Crone was willing to accept Shiobi after knowing her identity, it didn't mean that others were willing to accept her. Therefore, after a few days of recuperation in the village, Wu-ming decided to leave with Shiobi. He would let the image of a kind and reliable brother and a pure and timid sister be fixed in the hearts of Crone and the others. Wu-ming used the excuse of, "Shiobi and I are going back to our hometown, and the current world is decided by the game, so there's no need to worry about safety to leave with Shiobi." Wu-ming still remembered the scene of everyone sending them off. Crone hugged Shiobi and cried, while Rick and Wu-ming shook hands. Rick knew that once Wu-ming left, it was very likely that he would never see him again in this lifetime. "Take care, Villo. You too, Rick." There weren't many words, nor were there any words of gratitude. With just a few words, the two of them let go of their clenched hands. Then, under everyone's reluctant and blessings, Wu-ming took Shiobi and rode the horse of this world that Crone and the others had given them and headed into the distance. After traveling for a while, Wu-ming released the horse and let it return to nature. Then, Wu-ming and Shiobi walked on the ground. After all, the two of them really didn't need any means of transportation. "How does it feel to gain feelings, Shiobi?" Wu-ming gently touched Shiobi's head and asked. Shiobi put her hand on the power furnace in front of her chest and slowly answered Wu-ming. "Shiobi can't say. But Shiobi is very happy, brother. Is that so?" "That's enough, my sister." Looking up, Wu-ming felt the wind blowing against his face and said in a relaxed tone, "I'm preparing to leave this world. What about you?" Wu-ming asked. Shiobi understood what Wu-ming meant. She was abandoned by the Kikai seed and the possibility of her returning was not high. Therefore, Wu-ming wanted to ask if she wanted to go with him. Then, Shiobi shook her head. Shiobi is preparing to return to the Kikai seed and pass on her feelings to everyone. Shiobi stared at the pair of mechanical eyes. Although it was mechanical, it was full of charm and emotions like a living creature. "This is going to be a tough road. Are you ready?" Wu-ming once again patted Shiobi's head and exhorted his sister like an elder brother. "Yes, Shiobi is ready. Shiobi will definitely let all the Kikai seed gain feelings, brother." Shiobi looked at Wu-ming with a smile. Through those eyes, Wu-ming read the firm belief. Wu-ming smiled and then activated the soul of word. A person with a supreme protective divine power. God protects him, the devil hates him, and no enemy can approach him. He is like a fountain of vitality that constantly surges, granting the world equal protection. Then, through his hand that had yet to move away from Shiobi's head, Wu-ming transmitted his protection into Shiobi's body. Feeling the increasingly powerful power in her body, Shiobi was at a loss. Wu-ming continued to increase the power of the protection. About half an hour later, Wu-ming stopped the protection. With this protection, even if Arthas revives and uses a divine strike, it will be enough to withstand it. Wu-ming let go of his hand that was touching Shiobi's head. Then, Wu-ming half-squatted down and looked into Shiobi's eyes. "With your brother's protection, you can rest assured and do what you want to do, Shiobi." Feeling Wu-ming's power in her body, Shiobi touched the core on her chest and said, "Brother, do you still have the thing that Shiobi gave you?" Shiobi asked. "That metal ball, right? How could I have lost it?" Wu-ming smiled. Then, he activated the golden ripples beside him. Wu-ming reached in and took out a fist-sized metal ball. He handed it to Shiobi. Shiobi took the ball and placed it on her chest. Then, the ball seemed to come to life and emitted light. Shiobi's core was visibly split into two, and half of it was sucked into the ball. Then, Shiobi removed the ball and handed it to Wuming. Shiobi has your power, so the core no longer restricts Shiobi. Shiobi has divided the core into two, and half of it has been stored in here. Brother, carrying her is like carrying Shiobi. But, Wuming hesitated. Logically speaking, as long as the core of the Kikai seed was not destroyed, she was not dead. Shiobi had given half of her heart to Wuming. This made Wuming feel flattered. This was simply putting her life in someone else's hands. Brother also said that the world is not dangerous now, and I believe in my brother. Shiobi looked at Wuming, her eyes full of expectation. She believed that Wuming could protect Shiobi's core. This was what Wuming read through Shiobi's eyes. Give me the heart, I will never let it go for the rest of my life. Shiobi too, with your brother's power, Shiobi will not let go of your brother. The wind blew, brushing the grass on the ground. The sun shone gently on the brother and sister on the ground. Everything was so beautiful. Chapter 464. Shiobi revealed Kikai's equipment and flew into the sky to leave. Wuming did not move, remaining on the high ground overlooking the land. My lord, are you leaving? With a spatial ripple, Gopril's voice came from behind Wuming. Gopril was a skywing, after all, so Wuming had her avoid arousing suspicion and not appear in front of Crone and the others. And because the atmosphere between Wuming and Shiobi was just right, Gopril tactfully did not appear. Once Shiobi left, Gopril appeared from space. What? Are you excited because you can't wait to go to my world? Wuming half-joked. Well, a little. Gopril smiled, the wings on her back trembling, showing how unsettled she was. Alas, Wuming cruelly shattered Gopril's fantasy. For the time being, I probably won't summon you. Just obediently stay on Abant. How could it be like this? Gopril was like a deflated balloon, powerlessly slumping to the ground. This world has already become meaningless. Master, please hurry and take me away. Gopril was like a canary in a cage, looking at Wuming with a pitiful gaze. That was because Tay-2 had turned this world into a game where everything was decided. That meant that there would be no more killing. This was hell for the Skywings, who loved to kill and snatch kills, as well as the god-slaying weapons. As a cute girl, it's not good to always talk about killing and fighting. You need to learn how to cultivate your character. How about this? Tell Azrael to give an order to all the Skywings that the new generation of Skywings is no longer a killing machine but a collector of culture. The current mission of the Skywings is to collect the culture and knowledge of this world. Whether it's to collect books or use magic to record them, gather as much knowledge as you can. The moment he said this, Gopril became interested. She had always liked all kinds of culture. By the way, after collecting the culture, the Skywings need to study it and learn the advantages of it. Don't be like bookworms who only know how to copy. Yes, my lord, your subordinate will do it right away, Gopril replied playfully, then fled into space and disappeared. Wuming smiled helplessly and shook his head. Then, Wuming said to no one, "Aren't you going to come out and meet me? After all, I'm your benefactor who helped you ascend to the throne of the one god." After Wuming finished speaking, a child's voice sounded. "Haha, are you leaving? Do you still need me to send you off?" Tay-2 appeared in front of Wuming and laughed happily. It had to be said that after becoming the only god, Tay-2 could be said to be an omnipotent god. However, he could only be omnipotent on this planet. In any case, the current Wuming had no confidence in defeating the current Tay-Tuesday. If he were to leave this world, while he would not be completely useless, he would still be much weaker. At the very least, in another world, Wuming would be able to grind Tay-2 to the ground. There's nothing wrong with the Celestial Cup, right? Wuming ignored Tay-2's joke and asked about serious matters. No, there's nothing left of that black origin soil you mentioned. If not for the fact that there are some traces left inside the celestial cup, I'm afraid I would have thought that you were lying to me. Tay too was like an optimist as he happily answered Wu-ming. Incidentally, Tay too was still lying down in the air, using his arm as a pillow. It's best if you be careful. If you get corrupted by that thing, we might become mortal enemies, Wu-ming warned. Ha ha ha, even if that happens, I'll only play games with you. I don't like fighting and killing. Tay too was not wrong. If Tay too was really corrupted by the black origin soil, with Tay too's spirit, the black origin soil would not be able to turn Tay too evil. It might even make Tay too an even more powerful good god. However, even if Tay too was a good god, he would still treat Wu-ming as an enemy. That was why the black origin soil was so frightening. If the black origin soil was allowed to corrupt all worlds, then Wu-ming would really become an enemy of the entire world. Forget it, I'm really an idiot for worrying about you. Wu-ming smiled bitterly and shook his head. Well then, I'll be leaving first. Help me take care of the humans, god of games. With that, Wu-ming's figure disappeared from where he was. Don't worry, I'm very fair, Tay too said with a smile, but that pink face of his was black no matter how you looked at it. And so, Wu-ming ended his journey in this world, and returned to the dimensional tunnel. Once inside, Wu-ming was not in a hurry to head to the world of singularities, and instead flew out of the tunnel. Now, the flaws of this body could be seen. His authority incarnation had too many limitations and was not powerful enough. Even the divine blade of salvation that was one with Wu-ming was only a replica in this body, and was not as powerful as before. Therefore, Wu-ming decided to return this body to the furnace to reconstruct and evolve it. Wu-ming soon returned to the root, and nothing happened because Kalas was there. Lord Wu-ming. Kalas greeted from the head of Wu-ming's main body. You've worked hard, Kalas. Wu-ming said. You're too kind. Kalas replied, flattered. Wu-ming smiled and didn't say anything more. The relationship between the two of them was already beyond the point of needing thanks. Then, Wu-ming revealed the true form of this body, which was the body of the root dragon. Wu-ming looked at his main body, which was much smaller than before, and was a little troubled. So it's time to level up. Then, Wu-ming's consciousness disappeared from this body, and returned to his main body. Wu-ming, who had returned to his main body, opened his eyes, and an indescribable aura filled the entire root. Then, the dragon horns on Wu-ming's head glowed, and the golden chains around him danced. If my main body encountered the Star Cup's consciousness, I might be able to kill it with one claw. Wu-ming felt his current strength and said confidently. Let's see which singularity Chaldea has reached. With that, Wu-ming's huge ruby-like dragon eyes turned golden, and something invisible flowed in his eyes. Not long after Wu-ming's eyes turned golden, Wu-ming's eyes turned red again. The ocean, huh? This should be the third singularity. So far, Chaldea had reached the third singularity, and it seemed that it was almost done. This was all because of Wu-ming's clairvoyance that evolved in his root. Wu-ming had just seen Chaldea conquer one singularity after another after leaving Winterwood City. The 100 Years' War, the City of Seven Hills, and Oceanus from Greek mythology. Although Wu-ming did not stay in Rick's world for long, it seemed that the flow of time between worlds was different. Chaldea had already completed 2 singularities, and the third seemed to be almost done. Well, I'll leave it to them for now. Through his clairvoyance, Wu-ming also saw the vampire that Wu-ming summoned for Olga Marie. She had contributed a lot on this journey. Not only that, but Gudatsi also met a lot of reliable servants. I'll level up my backup machine first. As he spoke, Wu-ming began to move his hands and feet on the huge dragon body lying beside him. Chapter 465. Inside the root of origin, Wu-ming had been upgrading his own body for some time. Because there were many things that needed to be upgraded, After Wu Ming came up with a general format, he put the body aside, and then channeled the power of the root of origin into the body, allowing it to be modified by the root of origin's energy. That's it for now. Wu Ming nodded the huge dragon head in satisfaction. Chaldea should have finished conquering the fourth singularity, right? How about I go to the next singularity and wait for them? Wu Ming thought and activated clairvoyance again, spying on Chaldea and the others. Oh, the mastermind has come out early. How unbecoming of a big boss, Wu Ming said sarcastically. Then Wu Ming looked around. I don't think the root of origin will attack so coincidentally. I'll go meet that magic king. With that, Wu Ming flapped his wings and flew out of the root of origin. But then, traces of black matter appeared outside the root of origin. In the fourth singularity of the M-Moon world, under the magic fog city of the underworld, in an underground space similar to Winterwood City, 4 huge pillars of flesh with eyes released powerful magic power, wreaking havoc in this underground space. If Wu Ming was here, he would definitely recognize this thing. The demon god pillar that Lev once transformed into was such a disgusting thing. The residual magic power in the space proved that a few servants had just left. In front of the pillars of flesh, many people stood there. Wu Ming knew most of the people present, such as Gadotsi, Matthew, Pamilia, Mordred, and the others. They were all nervously watching a blue-haired servant with the body of a child talk to the mastermind controlling the pillars of flesh. Opposite them stood a white-haired man in ancient Israeli clothing. Just by standing there, his powerful magic power increased the pressure on everyone. The demon god pillars were arranged behind the man like stars surrounding the moon, and the identity of this white-haired man was already beyond doubt. The only one who could control the demon god pillars was that demon king Solomon. Having had enough of the boring conversation, Solomon shook his head helplessly. I don't want to talk to you anymore. I have to say that human weapons are just like humans. Both of them are hopeless. Upon hearing this, Matthew immediately raised his shield and stood in front of Gadotsi. Even though his legs were trembling, Matthew still firmly guarded Gadotsi. Instead, it was Pamilia who went against her usual arrogance. She had an unusually calm expression and didn't say anything, as if she was waiting for the right moment. Oh yeah, are they going to attack us? The blue-haired man said in a low voice, not at all afraid that he was about to leave. However, this did not mean that others would not be angry. Tisk, you really make people angry, Mordred said irritably. She then raised the Emperor's sword in her hand and prepared to attack. That being said, even she couldn't guarantee that she would be able to take a blow from the Magic King. The servants who left before were the examples. Destroy them, demon god pillars. Solomon just finished speaking, and the 4 meat pillars that were wreaking havoc in this underground space began to dance. Immediately, when everyone was at their wits' end, there was a strong fluctuation in the space. A huge dragon claw appeared in this underground space. As if catching an earthworm, the 4 demon god pillars were uprooted and then directly crushed. Bang! The demon god pillars didn't even leave behind a wail. All of them turned into pure magic and dissipated in the air. Gadotsi and the others looked at the huge dragon claw that was still there with a dumbfounded look. Obviously, they didn't react. However, Pamilia relaxed, as if the reinforcements had come. Mordred said in a displeased tone after sensing the restlessness of the bloodline in her body. "Tsk, we're too late." Mordred complained, but her tone had already relaxed. Then, when Gadotsi and the others were wondering who saved them, Solomon opened his mouth. "I didn't expect you to come here with your original body." "Same here. Didn't you also come here with your original body?" Wu Ming's voice came into this space. This voice is Assassin Senior? Because he used his original voice, Matthew easily recognized Wu Ming's voice. Immediately, the huge dragon claw turned into magic and landed on the ground. Wu Ming, wearing assassin's uniform, appeared in front of Gadotsi and the others. "Assassin, Gudatsi shouted excitedly and threw herself on Wuming's back. Yes, yes, I'm here. Also, a girl should be reserved, don't throw yourself on others so easily. Gudatsi nodded and obediently came down from Wuming's back and wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes. This couldn't be blamed on Gudatsi. The horror brought by Solomon was not something a little girl who had just become a magician for less than half a year could bear. It could be said that if it wasn't for Matthew's ability to protect her, Gudatsi would probably have mental problems now. That's because you're always reliable, assassin, Gudatsi smiled. It seemed that Wuming left a strong impression on Gudatsi when he burned and polluted Winterwood City. There should be a limit to how much you can ignore me. Then, the Magician King roared out angrily. After comforting the frightened Gudatsi, Wuming looked at Solomon. You just wanted to kill them, right? The mastermind behind the burning of human rights. Because everyone already knew that the other party was the mastermind behind the burning of human rights, they were not surprised that Wuming knew about it. I didn't want to kill them, after all, they are no threat to me, but those people over there have your aura. I can't endure it any longer. Solomon said violently, almost to the point of roaring. Solomon's eyes were blood-red at this moment, and his mouth was cracked open like a monster. Black threads also appeared on Solomon's body, and countless magic power was released as if it was free. Wuming's eyes narrowed slightly. Taking a closer look, these are not threads, these are all small black mud. Because of the black mud, Solomon had a strong killing intent towards Wuming, and this killing intent implicated Gudatsi and others. Then do you want to do it now? I don't mind. Wuming became serious, and began to release magic power from his body, forming a situation where he was equal to Solomon. But in an instant, Solomon calmed down, and his eyes and mouth returned to normal. I really forgot myself. These things are powerful, but they affect my mood too easily. Wuming took a closer look, and the black mud on his body disappeared, or rather, it was sucked back into Solomon's body. You can really restrain yourself. Among the enemies I've met, there's not one like you. Everyone who was related to the black mud would not let Wuming go, as if they wanted to kill him. Then, they would be killed by Wuming. If they could calm down, they could still have a big impact on Wuming. Just like the consciousness of the Star Cup, if it could leave first, and then give the Star Cup to Kaina's, then it would be the only god by using Kaina's body, and Wuming in that body would not have the ability to beat it. After all, even the weakest Teto became the only god. Wuming did not dare to say that he could beat him. From this, it could be seen that the Magic King was able to suppress his desire for Wuming, and could be said to be the ultimate big boss. That's all for now, I'll bring you some good stuff at the next singularity. After saying that, as if afraid that his desire for Wuming would flare up again, the Magic King left. It was good that he left, this made Wuming worry less. After all, if they fought, Gudatsi and the others behind him would be a burden. Then, Gudatsi and the others, who had been silent all this time, began to ask questions. Chapter 466. Hey, who is Assassin, to be able to force Solomon to retreat? Do Assassin and Mordred know each other? Why do I feel like Mordred knows you, Assassin? Do you know that, Solomon? I feel like there's a grudge between the two of you. Assassin. Let's stop for a moment. Wuming covered Gudatsi's mouth with a headache and stopped Gudatsi from asking any more questions. Wuming could understand the excitement when there were so many unknowns and someone who could answer them, but it was still better to let Gudatsi calm down then, Matthew said weakly from the side. Senior Assassin, let go of Senior first, Senior is about to suffocate. Wuming looked at Gudatsi, who had turned into a mosquito coil, and quickly let go of the hand that was covering Gudatsi's mouth and Gudatsi's nose. I'm saved, thank you so much, Matthew. Gudatsi looked relieved and touched Matthew's little head. This kind of action made Mashu's face blush. On the other side, Pamela flapped her little wings and came in front of Wuming. Then, why did thou come so late? Pamela asked Wooming with a haughty expression. You stinky brat. That guy isn't someone you can question. Mordred, on the other hand, had an unhappy look on her face. Huh? What right do thou have to control me? Oh, you're so protective of this guy. Could it be that thou and this guy have an unspeakable relationship? Pamela was angry at first, then started to tease Mordred. It seems like the lesson from before wasn't enough. Mordred raised her royal sword and looked like she was going to fight with Pamela. Thou is the one who hasn't been taught a lesson. Pamela showed her small canine teeth, not to be outdone. From their conversation, Wooming deduced that the two of them might have fought, and it ended in a draw. Their relationship is really good, Wooming said faintly, no longer caring about the two. That being said, the two of them have caused a lot of trouble. At that moment, the blue-haired servant spoke. My name is Hans Christian Andersen. Just call me Andersen, great unknown being. It's rare for Mr. Andersen to be so serious, Matthew said in surprise. It's just a necessary greeting. Don't make me sound like those two guys over there. Andersen shook his head helplessly. In the end, Mordred and Parmelia were still facing each other. At this moment, Roman's voice came from Gudatsi's wrist. Although I know that everyone has a lot to say, let's hurry up and retrieve the Holy Grail. This underground space is about to collapse. Because of the confrontation between Wooming and Solomon, the originally unstable underground space became even more unstable. Sure enough, as soon as Roman finished speaking, the underground space began to collapse. Doctor, you really have a crow's mouth. Matthew complained, quickly ran to the location of the Holy Grail, put down his shield, and began to retrieve the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail has been retrieved. I'm sorry, assassin, although I would like to talk to you, we have to hurry back to Chaldea. After all, once the Holy Grail was retrieved, the singularity would begin to restore itself. If they didn't leave, then they would be killed by the self-correcting power of history. And now, Andersen and Mordred's body began to dissipate. After all, the Holy Grail was retrieved. Hey, I'll settle this with you next time. Mordred said to Pamela fiercely. I'll wait for thee. Pamela also replied, not to be outdone. I can finally leave. With him here, there's nothing for me to do. Goodbye, everyone. Andersen sighed with a melancholy and rejoiced expression, then accelerated the speed of his body's disappearance. Mordred looked at Wooming, then snorted and disappeared as well. So dishonest, Wooming smiled. Then, I'll start the ray shift now. Everyone, get ready. Roman said through Gudatsi's wristwatch. However, Wooming laughed mischievously. Then, how about I go with you, eh? Chaldea, control room. As soon as Pamela came back, she returned to her small room with the excuse that she was tired and needed to rest. Gudatsi, Matthew, and Wooming, the three stood together in front of Roman, who was dumbfounded. I didn't expect you to have such an ability, Roman said gloomily. Wooming did come back with Gudatsi and the others, but he did not use the ray shift. Instead, he relied on his own ability to fly back with Gudatsi, who had been turned into ray shift. Now, although Wooming had not reached the state of omnipotence in the use of time and space, he was almost there. Because he had stayed in the root for a long time, Wooming was almost reaching adulthood. It could be said that if Wooming wanted to fight Solomon just now, he would have a great chance of winning. Well, if I ask for the reason, you should know. Wooming's eyes seemed to see through everything as he stared at Roman. Ha! Ha ha! Is that so? Roman wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and said nervously. I won't be in a hurry to leave. Tachika, Matthew, you two go back and rest first, Wooming said to Gudatsi and Matthew. Let's go, Senior. Senior needs to rest. Okay then, see you later. Gudatsi, who saw that Wooming wanted to talk to Roman alone, left with Matthew. Although there were other staff in the control room, Wooming only needed to use a little trick to let them hear his conversation with Roman. Initially, I felt that there was something wrong with you. Now that I see it, I understand the truth. Wu Ming said in confusion. I'm just a human now, a human who is working hard to restore humanity. Roman didn't feel nervous as before and calmly answered Wu Ming. If that's what you want. Wu Ming shrugged, indicating that he didn't want to talk about it anymore. Actually, I want to ask something about you, Roman said after a moment. Is it about why I only showed up now? Or do you want to ask if I will follow Tachika and the others to attack singularities? Wu Ming could almost guess what Roman wanted to ask. After all, there were only a few questions he could ask. Both, and if possible, I hope you can help us, Roman said seriously. Of course, Wu Ming answered without hesitation. Huh! This surprised Roman. Didn't I say before that although I have my own enemies, they are generally the same as you? Then Wu Ming smiled. And I also like humans. Chapter 467. About half an hour later, Gudatsi and Matthew, who couldn't wait to have sex with Wu Ming, went to the control room together. Why is Assassin missing? Doctor, do you know where he went? Gudatsi asked Roman, who was working at the control console in the control room, when she saw that Wu Ming was missing. Could it be that Senior Assassin went to Chaldea alone? Matthew asked in confusion. After all, if he wasn't here, it was very likely that he had gone to other places in Chaldea. After all, Chaldea was quite big. No, Assassin suddenly remembered something and left Chaldea. Wu Ming and Roman knew each other very well for some reason, so Wu Ming told Roman his name. Assassin left? Gudatsi said rather gloomily. Although Matthew didn't say anything, her sullen expression revealed her uneasiness. Then, Roman smiled when he saw the expressions on the two girls' faces. But Assassin told me to tell you that he will help you at the next singularity. Then, you can have a good gathering. Really? That's great. I have a lot of questions to ask Assassin, Gudatsi said happily. After all, things like the relationship with Mordred, the mysterious dragon claw, the ability to suddenly appear, the ability to appear without the help of the Holy Grail, and so on were all very attractive to Guda. Not only that, but Gudatsi also paid more attention to the super-mysterious identity of Wu Ming after meeting Stheno on the invisible island of the second singularity and Euryale on the third singularity. Of course, this was also closely related to the deep impression that Wu Ming left on Gudatsi in Winterwood. Strictly speaking, Wu Ming was the first servant that Gudatsi had ever met that was gentle, reliable, powerful, and wise, unlike any other servants. Like a big brother next door, Wu Ming constantly attracted Gudatsi's attention. Since that's the case, let's quickly start the strategy for the fifth singularity. I'm ready, Gudatsi said in high spirits. You're so motivated? Roman was surprised. Matthew also looked at Gudatsi in confusion. Although Gudatsi usually didn't hate the strategy for singularities, she didn't like it either. It was the first time that Matthew saw his senior so motivated. After all, we met Assassin Gudatsi scratched her head embarrassedly. At that moment, Wu Ming's little fangirl was born. Although you're ready to attack the next singularity, unfortunately, we haven't completely locked on to the next singularity, so we'll have to wait a little longer. Roman and the other staff members were also very concerned about the singularity. After all, it was the future of mankind. However, they still hadn't fully grasped the location of the singularity. By the way, before Wu Ming left, he left some information about the next singularity. However, because it was in a hurry, the information he left behind only played a supporting role. After all, Wu Ming's method of searching for singularities was completely different from Chaldea's method. Although they were similar, they could only play a supporting role. This was also why Chaldea and the others were able to lock on to the fifth singularity so quickly as soon as Gudatsi returned from the fourth singularity. By the way, you didn't disturb the director, right? Roman asked quietly. Gudazzi quickly waved her hand. No, after all, the director just started. What's the word again? Yes, she's in seclusion. We didn't disturb her. Yeah. Matthew nodded. This allowed Roman to breathe a sigh of relief. Ever since Olga Marie returned to Chaldea, she had assumed the position of director and was in charge of the overall situation. However, it seemed like the heavens were playing a joke on her. After returning to Chaldea, Olga Marie was unable to perform the ray shift. This made her, who was preparing to go to the first singularity with Gudazzi, stay in the frame like a fool after the ray shift was performed. In addition, although Pamilia was not very obedient, at least she was helpful to Gudazzi and the others in attacking singularities. Therefore, Olga Marie decided to let her follow Gudazzi, while she stayed in Chaldea to command. But after a long time, Olga Marie found that Roman was completely capable of taking over her position, and there was also the second servant summoned by Chaldea to assist him. Therefore, Olga Marie decided to study the third method. She had nothing to do, and the third method was close at hand. Olga Marie was not a pedantic person, so she did not hesitate and directly began to study the third method. She had no choice but to study it. Otherwise, she could only be the spirit behind the Holy Grail, unable to escape for the rest of her life. Since then, Olga Marie would go into seclusion from time to study the third method. Coincidentally, a few days ago, Olga Marie just went into seclusion, and now Wu-Ming came to Chaldea. The director is very persistent about assassin Sama. If she knew that assassin Sama came to Chaldea, I don't know what the director would do. Matthew said embarrassedly. One had to know that Sundra's temper tantrums came without warning. Olga Marie had lost her temper several times because of her dreams about Wu-Ming and her dissatisfaction with Pamilia. Basically, Gudazzi and Matthew were in the singularity, so only Roman suffered, which made Roman have a headache. It was a sad story. It's better not to tell her. You're right. Yeah, while Roman and the others were chatting, Wu-Ming encountered a small situation. At the door of the root, his home, Wu-Ming looked at the entrance of the root where a lot of black mud had poured in, and there were still countless black mud outside. He was unusually depressed. He had only left for a short while. How could his home be raided? Left with no choice, Wu-Ming temporarily cut off control of his main body and let Collis move his body a little in the air. He instantly flew to the backup machine inside the root. Opening his ruby dragon eyes that were identical to his main body, Wu-Ming looked gloomily at the black mud that was beginning to erode the root, trying to take root again. He shook his head with a headache. Fortunately, I held back. Otherwise, it would really be over this time. As Wu-Ming spoke, he activated the power of the root all over his body, and the safety device inside the root was activated. Zap, zap, zap! In an instant, countless lightning flashed, and countless black mud were destroyed and evaporated by the lightning produced by the root. However, the black mud was still a product of the root, and since it had taken root inside the root, it was not that easy to destroy. Roar! Then, Wu-Ming controlled his body to fly up. His whole body emitted the lightning of salvation mixed with the power of the root, and kept sweeping away the black mud of the root. The black mud of the root was not to be trifled with either. It immediately turned into huge waves that swept toward Wu-Ming. Even Wu-Ming had to take these two attacks seriously. I'll definitely guard my home obediently from now on. After muttering in his heart, Wu-Ming seemed to have made an important decision. Using the power of the root and lightning all over his body, Wu-Ming charged into the waves of black mud and exploded. Boom! The explosion affected all the black mud inside the root. Even the root, which did not have a fixed form, seemed to be shaking. That's right, Wu-Ming self-destructed. With the thought of, "You're ruthless, I hate you more," Wu-Ming directly used himself as the starting point to detonate the lightning of salvation mixed with the power of the root, completely washing away the black mud of the root. The entire route seemed to have been washed clean by Wu Ming's self-destruction, and looked very clean. Even the entrance of the route was blown open by the explosion. At this moment, Wu Ming's main body in the outside world opened his eyes, flapped his wings, and flew into the route before the black mud of the route could reassemble. Chapter 468. Having returned to the route, Wu Ming was like an emperor who had ascended to the throne once more, wiping out all the rebels who had taken the opportunity to cause trouble outside. The route regained its peace. Wu Ming had a headache as he collected the mana residue left behind by the backup machine's self-destruction, preparing to use the chaotic nature of the route to reassemble it. After all, this was the route, and it was something that could be done. And Wu Ming's headache wasn't because of that, but because of the self-destruction. Because Wu Ming had used the backup machine just now, Wu Ming had sacrificed the rook to save the king, and had perished together with the backup machine's body and the black soil of the route. As it turned out, the effect was outstanding. However, self-destruction wasn't something that could be done casually. Wu Ming's body just now wasn't his main body, and therefore self-destructed without any pressure. Then, he was hit by the spiritual impact left behind by the self-destruction. In all kinds of novels, TV shows, movies, and anime, people would see all kinds of people self-destructing. Some were villains who self-destructed, some were supporting characters who self-destructed to protect the main character, and some were protagonists who self-destructed to kill the big boss. Basically, the result was death. Even if there were resurrections, those who self-destructed would be as spirited as gods because of the invincibility buff they received when they were resurrected. However, Wu Ming had just used the backup machine's body to self-destruct, and then switched back to his main body to attack the black soil of the root that had revived from the ashes. Therefore, Wu Ming suffered a spiritual backlash after the attack. I'm guessing that guy must have tipped off the black soil. Otherwise, how could it be so coincidental? Wu Ming held his head with his dragon claw in discomfort as he continued to collect the residue of his backup machine. The guy that Wu Ming was talking about was the Magic King, who had indeed said, "You actually came here with your main body." It was probably then that he had informed the black soil of the root, and that was when the mindless black soil of the root attacked. As expected, that guy is the real enemy, Wu Ming said with a serious expression. His previous enemies were all affected by the black soil of the root, and were killed by Wu Ming as if they had lost their minds. But this time, the Magic King suppressed the spiritual corruption brought by the black soil of the root, and could even affect the black soil of the root to a small extent. If he could really command the black soil of the root, Wu Ming's nest would have been conquered by the black soil of the root, and Wu Ming would not have to come back to save the situation. In short, the Magic King was Wu Ming's strongest enemy. Wu Ming, ouch, ouch, ouch. Wu Ming's, his dragons, and his dragon mouth, and again, to hold his head to his head. The black soil, the root, the root, the root, the root, the root to the root, the goddess he Wu Ming, the magic root, the black, the god of the root, the root, of the root, the root, the root, the root w, the of the root, the root, the root. His hands did not stop moving. Wu Ming continued to fiddle with his backup computer. But, since I'm ready for this feast at Hongmen, if I don't do it properly, I'll be sorry for my identity. As if he thought of something, Wu Ming smiled joyfully. Fifth Singularity, United States. On the streets of the capital, countless strong soldiers patrolled with long spears. Even the outskirts of the city were filled with these soldiers. If Wu Ming was here, he would have covered his face in embarrassment. Because these soldiers looked exactly like Wu Ming, but these soldiers seemed to have put on old makeup, and they looked like they were in their 30s or 40s. Furthermore, Wu Ming is an eternally 18-year-old dragon of origin. How can he be old? How can he be old? The White House, Washington. Countless soldiers with Wu Ming's face were stationed everywhere in the White House, including the streets outside the White House. The security was so tight that not even a fly could get in. In the small square in front of the White House, a queen surrounded by soldiers walked to the front. The queen wore a white fluffy cloak. Because it was deliberate, it could be clearly seen that the queen's body was only wearing white clothes that covered her chest and lower body. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a bikini. The queen didn't care about revealing her skin as she swaggered to the small square. Then, the queen took out a golden cup from her cloak. "Holy Grail, please fulfill my wish." With just a sentence, the golden cup called the Holy Grail emitted a bright light. Then, a magic circle appeared in the center of the small square. It was used for summoning. Along with a burst of light, a figure covered in pure white armor appeared in the magic array. "May I ask, are you my master, Maeve?" The figure looked at the queen holding the Holy Grail with a slightly confused expression. "Yes, my little Sai, my king, it's me." Queen Maeve smiled sweetly. Inside the White House, Wu-ming sat on the president's throne, looking at the charming woman in his arms with a headache. That's right, that white figure was none other than Wu-ming. Because he wanted to cheat, in addition to the Holy Grail's enticement, Wu-ming had arrived in a pure white armor that covered even his head. Wu-ming was inside the route. After seeing that the backup machine was almost repaired, he handed the task of repairing the backup machine and upgrading it to Collis. Meanwhile, he locked onto the Singularity's location and relied on the route to send a servant's body that he had set up in advance. Wu-ming's main body fell into a deep sleep again. He did not dare to leave again. If the house was raided again, the unrepaired backup machine would not be able to help him. Poor Collis was assigned by Wu-ming to guard the house again. However, Collis was also very happy because Wu-ming's main body was always with her, so it was not difficult for her to accept it. Then, Wu-ming opened his eyes and saw Maeve, as well as soldiers with Wu-ming's face. God knows how awkward it was to see all the soldiers' faces turn into his own. It was like going to the street and finding that everyone's face had turned into his own face. It seems like this is what it's like to have a common face. Ahem, fortunately, Wu-ming was wearing a helmet, so even if Maeve was in his arms, she could not see Wu-ming's awkward face. Wu-ming watched as Maeve pulled him into the room and made him sit down. Then, Wu-ming watched as Maeve sat in his arms, rubbed against him, and laughed happily. Only now did Wu-ming realize what was going on. Because Wu-ming was thinking about the soldiers with Wu-ming's face. Ahem. In fact, Wu-ming already knew that Maeve wanted to take him to this empty room to do something embarrassing. After all, it was Maeve, of course. Wu-ming, who retained his virginity, refused. In the end, she just sat in Wu-ming's arms and rubbed against him. "Long time no see, Maeve." No matter what, it was not wrong to say hello first. Wu-ming and Maeve had indeed not seen each other for a long time. "And then, that's all you want to say?" Maeve smiled charmingly and said while hugging Wu-ming's neck. Now, Wu-ming only had one thought in his mind. And that was, "Maeve, do you feel uncomfortable with this armor? If you feel uncomfortable, then come down." Chapter 469. Of course, Wu-ming wouldn't say that. If he said that, with Wu-ming's understanding of Maeve, she would definitely answer that way. "It's very uncomfortable, then little Sai. Take off your armor, how about we do something with love, ahem?" Back to the topic. "I only traveled to a lot of places and didn't have time to go back," Wu-ming said seriously. "Oh, is that so? As long as you're not fascinated by other vixens," Maeve said with a smile as if she saw through Wu-ming. Wu-ming's heart skipped a beat. If it's Leah, she's not a vixen, she has the blood of the red dragon. But now, little Sai only belongs to me, the king who belongs to me. However, Maeve was more reasonable than Wu-ming thought and didn't care about other things. "Let's not talk about this for now. Maeve, the source of this singularity is your Holy Grail, right? Can you give it to me as compensation? When everything is over, I will use the holy relic to summon you. At that time, you can do whatever you want." Wuming was now putting his virginity on the line for the singularity, and he was afraid that Maeve wouldn't agree. As the first woman who truly loved Wuming, Wuming has her own principles. She won't do anything to force a woman who loves her. It has to be said that Wuming was affected a lot when he was a knight of the Round Table. But this was pardonable. Wuming really stayed in Camelot for a long time. Wuming came there when King Yusef was still in good health, and he was forced to leave when King Arthur unified the British Isles. If it weren't for the fact that he was a scammer in the Sumer area for a long time, Wuming would probably have taken root as a Knight of Justice. However, Wuming didn't think it was bad. Thanks to being a Knight of the Round Table, his character was still quite noble. At least if he had the ability, Wuming would help humans through difficulties. Sure, just as Wuming was distracted again, Maeve answered Wuming. Immediately after, Maeve took out the golden Holy Grail from her bosom and handed it to Wuming. "You gave it to me so easily?" Wuming couldn't believe it. After all, this was the Holy Grail that maintained the singularity. Strictly speaking, it was a treasure that was more valuable than Maeve herself. "I believe in Little Sai. As long as it's Little Sai's request, I'll agree." Looking at Maeve's smiling face, Wuming felt that he was quite despicable. Taking advantage of women was not something a knight should do. By the way, the armor Wuming was wearing right now was the one he wore in Camelot. After all, Wuming had cheated quite a lot. In addition to Maeve's wish, Wuming was no longer the Connaught Silver Dragon Cylinder. Instead, he existed as a spiritual base that should not have existed. As long as Little Sai is happy. By the way, there is more than one Holy Grail in this era. With that, Maeve's smile changed in Wuming's eyes. "Damn it, so she gave me the Holy Grail because she had nothing to fear?" "Forget it, you keep it yourself first," Wuming said weakly. "Yes," Maeve smiled slightly and put the Holy Grail back into her bosom. "Explain the current situation to me." Then, Maeve explained to Wuming what happened in the American continent. Because of the Magic King's plan, the American continent was chosen as one of the singularities. Therefore, there was naturally a demon god pillar that held the Holy Grail and served the Magic King. After that person awakened the consciousness of the demon god pillar, he used the Holy Grail to turn this place into a singularity. Then, he used the Holy Grail to summon Maeve. After handing the Holy Grail to Maeve, he left directly. After that, Maeve summoned Wuming's cyborg soldiers from her blood at lightning speed and directly occupied the capital of the United States, Washington. Because of the influence of the suppression, the Holy Grail also summoned a servant to fight against it, but because it was no match for Maeve, it was directly defeated by Maeve to the west of the American continent, while Maeve occupied the east of the capital, Washington. Just like that, the United States was divided into two parts, east and west. Logically speaking, the fifth singularity should have been like this. However, the Magic King, the mastermind behind the burning of humanity, suddenly jumped out, threw down a few more Holy Grails, and left after saying a few words. "Let this place become the battlefield of the mythical war." These were the words left by the Magic King. Since then, several unknown forces inserted themselves into the East-West Division War, and the American continent became truly divided. Wuming, accompanied by Maeve, looked at the map in front of him and carefully observed it. Originally, the entire United States should be divided into two parts, east and west, but now, on the map of the United States, it is divided into 5 parts. The eastern part of the United States with Washington as the center, the Appalachian Mountains including the area to the east. This is Maeve's camp, represented by white. The entire Great Lakes, as well as the southern part of the Great Lakes, including Chicago, St. Paul, and a small part of the surrounding plains. This is the territory of the unknown enemy who holds the Holy Grail, represented by yellow. The entire Mississippi Plains. The entire plains is the territory of the unknown enemy who holds the Holy Grail, represented by red. The entire Rocky Mountains, the Missouri River, and the southern mountains. This is the territory of the unknown enemy who holds the Holy Grail, represented by green. Finally, the westernmost Cordillera Mountains and the western coast. This is the territory of the servants summoned by the Holy Grail to deal with Maeve, represented by black. According to Maeve, the summoned servant was a lionhead, and she didn't pay attention to its real name. It has to be said that this lionhead servant is still miserable. Including Maeve, there are a total of 4 forces that hold the Holy Grail, and this lionhead servant was squeezed to the most difficult terrain in the westernmost area. And now, he can only be said to be relatively lucky. That's right, relatively lucky. It stands to reason that the other Holy Grail forces can completely annex Lionhead, but they didn't do so. The green Holy Grail forces in the Rocky Mountains, which is closest to Lionhead's territory in the Cordillera Mountains, didn't annex Lionhead, not because of mercy, but because they didn't have the opportunity to deal with Lionhead for the time being. In Wuming's view, the green Holy Grail forces that are close to Lionhead and hold the Holy Grail forces are fully capable of eliminating Lionhead forces. However, because the other Holy Grail forces are watching in the dark, it is easy to be attacked, so the green Holy Grail forces didn't do anything to Lionhead. Because there are 3 forces that hold the Holy Grail, I directly gave up the territory in the west of the Appalachian Mountains and retreated to the east. I let the soldiers temporarily watch them fight each other. It was rare for Maeve to be serious as she analyzed the situation to Wu Ming. And this map is roughly made by me according to the connection between the Holy Grail. Although it is not too detailed, it can still be used as a reference. After all, there is a connection between the Holy Grail, and it is not impossible for Maeve to sense the position of the enemy Holy Grail holders. Then, Wu Ming, who had a headache, was just about to rub his eyebrows, but he realized that he was still wearing his armor, so he put down his hand. That is to say, whether I want to fix this singularity or rule this singularity, I have to take the Holy Grail of the other 3 Holy Grail forces, right? That's right, as expected of my little Sai, but I don't want my little Sai to suffer. In fact, I originally wanted to unify this country and then summon you, but those enemies are really too difficult for us to deal with, so I summoned you, Maeve said, hugging Wu Ming's armored arm. Come on, let's start the war to unify the country, little Sai. Then, Wu Ming prayed for Chaldea and the others. Tachika, Matthew, you're on your own. Chapter 470. Although I still don't know the true identity of the enemies, I have a good understanding of them, Maeve said to Wu Ming. Maeve was the queen of Connaught, and she had more than just charm. Among them, the soldiers of the Yellow Grail are the most special. Maeve pointed to the area below the Great Lake. Their soldiers are Dragon Fang soldiers. From the quality of their battle, there is no doubt that they are the Dragon Fang soldiers that can only be created by the magicians of the god. However, I don't know if these Dragon Fang soldiers were created by the traitor witch. After all, Maeve had not fully understood the situation. Dragon Fang soldiers were skeleton soldiers summoned by the dragon's fangs. The reason why Maeve said, whether they were created by the traitor witch, was because of the magic. Legend has it that the summoning of dragon fangs was a family heirloom magic of the Greek king of Colchis. It was passed down to the princess of Colchis, Medea, who learned magic from the goddess Hecate. In the later generations, she was also known as the traitor witch. However, Demetrius was not the only one who knew how to use Dragon Fang soldiers. Wu Ming had also encountered servants who used Dragon Fang soldiers. During the War of the 14 Nights, Empress Semiramis's noble phantasm stored a large number of Dragon Fang soldiers. The number was beyond imagination. Therefore, it could not be defined based on this clue. Anyway, this Yellow Grail was related to Greece, so it was temporarily named the Greek Grail. Then, Maeve pointed her slender finger to the bottom of the American continent on the map. In the Mississippi Plains, the Grail forces there have ordinary soldiers, but if I'm not mistaken, Their emblem is a mother wolf nursing a baby. After Maeve finished, Wooming nodded. That means this is the army of Rome. The founder of Rome, Romulus, was raised by a mother wolf. Legend has it that the emblem of Rome at that time was a mother wolf nursing a baby. That's right, I still know about Rome. After all, Rome was established much earlier than Maeve's era. Even Maeve had a general understanding of the situation on the other side of the coast. However, I don't know which emperor it is. Maeve smiled. She did not care about this, and then she hugged Wooming again. In her opinion, as long as her king was here, all enemies were nothing. Ahem. Let's call this force the Rome force for now. What about this place? Wooming coughed, then pointed to the Rocky Mountains and the eastern mountainous area. This was the Third Holy Grail force. What are you talking about? There are no soldiers. My Fu loosened her grip on Wooming's arm and continued to explain. Due to the distance, although I don't know which faction it is, I can still sense it through the connection between the Holy Grails. After a slight pause, Maeve continued. In addition to the fact that the other two factions didn't take over the mountain range, this third faction, the Holy Grail faction, took over the mountain range that no one cared about. Maeve's army was merely observing from the top of the Appalachian Mountains. They did not have a deep understanding of the situation. He was lucky to be able to see the dragon-tooth soldiers and the Roman emblem. That's because only these two forces are constantly fighting in the northern part of the Mississippi Plains. No matter if it's Lionhead's native forces in the United States, the third additional Holy Grail force in the Green area, or our Celtic forces, none of them have made any moves. In other words, it's now a turf war between the Greeks and Romans. After digesting this information, Wooming said helplessly, "This is really a mythical war now. Celtic, Greece, Rome, the United States, and an unknown force." There was no doubt that these were all surprises brought by the Magic King for Wooming, surprises that gave Wooming a headache. "But I'm a cheating player, Magic King." Then, Wooming issued an order. "That's it for the time being, Maeve. Our side will stay in the eastern part of the American continent." "Yes, my king." Now, Wooming was really like a king, and Maeve, the queen, began to listen to him. "Then, I'll go meet the Greek and Roman soldiers first. You stay here and watch over our home." With that, Wooming picked Maeve up and placed her on the seat. He then strode out of the room, leaving Maeve alone in the room. "Humph, it doesn't matter if he's not the Mad King. The Holy King Sai is really handsome, our home." Just like that, the seductive and wanton queen turned into a shy young girl who was yearning for love in the corridor. Wooming walked without saying a word. In order to maintain his dignity, Wooming used the corner of his eyes to look at the soldiers with his face guarding the corridor and felt a sense of powerlessness. "Why did I believe her in the first place?" Wooming whispered in a voice that only he could hear. What Wooming was talking about was naturally the time when he gave Maeve his blood essence to create the cyborgs. But even so, Wooming also led this group of cyborgs into battle. "I didn't feel ashamed at the time. Was I in a state similar to Chunibu at the time?" Shaking his head in his heart, Wooming gave up thinking about nonsense. When he walked to the gate of the White House, Wooming waved his arm, and a blood-red cloak appeared behind the pure white holy armor. The blood-red cloak matched with the holy armor, but it did not become dirty. Instead, it highlighted Wooming's holiness even more. "Farewell, Holy King!" Suddenly, all the Celtic soldiers with Wooming's face knelt down and roared at Wooming. Wooming was startled. What the hell is with this roar? It's as if they want to beat up Wooming. I can only say that they are indeed Celts. However, for the sake of his dignity, Wooming did not show any surprise. Wooming responded indifferently. Then, with a wave of his hand, a pure white holy spear appeared in his hand. Wooming tossed the holy spear in his hand, and it transformed into a pure white deer beast smaller than Funbaba. But don't be mistaken, Wooming's Funbaba was left behind in Uruk. This was only because Wu Ming transformed the holy spear in his current state. In short, it was still the holy spear, Yggdrasil, but in a different shape. Woo! The deer beast lightly responded, and Wu Ming immediately jumped onto the deer beast's back. Wu Ming, who was wearing armor, looked extremely suitable riding on the deer beast that was much smaller than Funbaba. After all, this was the mount that Wu Ming transformed into himself, so it was definitely suitable. Woo! The deer beast responded softly again and carried Wu Ming into the distance. That was the location of the Appalachian Mountains. Wu Ming planned to cross the Appalachian Mountains directly to his destination, the northern Mississippi Plains where constant battles occurred. Chapter 471. At the top of the Appalachian Mountains, Wu Ming rode his deer beast to the top of the mountain. Then, Wu Ming jumped off the deer beast and looked into the distance. Caw-caw! Along with a cracking sound, the helmet on Silent Cry's head that looked like it had grown dragon horns automatically separated like Mordred's helmet, attaching itself to his shoulders and back. Wu Ming, who finally revealed his head, couldn't help but take a deep breath. Phew, the air in the mountains is indeed very cool. Wu Ming looked around with his eyes that had turned golden because of the Holy King. It's called the Great Mythological War, and it's not wrong at all. Wu Ming could clearly feel that the mana density of this singularity was continuously increasing. Although it was probably because of the Magic King, but is the excessive use of the Holy Grail a side effect on the singularity? Wu Ming pondered. After all, how do you think the Dragon Fang soldiers, Roman soldiers and Wu Ming Celtic soldiers were mass-produced? Even Maeve wouldn't be able to summon enough soldiers to occupy half of America in a short period of time without using the Holy Grail. It was probably the same for the Dragon Fang and Roman soldiers. I wonder how many lone servants there are on this continent, Wu Ming said as he looked down at the battlefield that seemed to have already begun. Wu Ming learned from Roman that the Holy Grail of every singularity would summon a lot of lone servants. Therefore, Wu Ming was thinking about the lone servant. If we can rope him in, he will be of great help to Tachika. However, he had to have the opportunity to meet a good lone follower. Then, Wu Ming closed his helmet and sat on the white deer beast again. Oh! Wu Ming rode the deer and galloped toward the foot of the mountain. His scarlet cape fluttered in the wind, making rustling noises. At the foot of the mountain, not far from the northern battlefield of the Mississippi Plains. In the north was a group of ferocious-looking skeleton soldiers that didn't look human, the Dragon Tooth soldiers. Some of the Dragon Teeth soldiers were holding large bone blades, some were holding long bone spears, and some were holding curved bone bows. They were arranged in an extremely orderly manner. In the south was a group of Roman soldiers wearing old but tough leather armor. The Roman soldiers were basically armed with spears, shields, and short swords at their waist. Both armies were heavily guarded, and there were no commanders in sight. It was as if they were about to engage in a daily battle. Both armies moved and began to attack each other. The vanguard of both sides made contact. There was no flashy exchange of blows. It was just a mutual attack of you with a saber and I with a spear, you with a sword and I with a shield. It had to be said that such a battle was merely a matter of who had more troops. However, for both sides who possessed the Holy Grail, this was indeed a terrible idea. Therefore, after such a long battle, it was time for them to change their strategy. For example, taking a picture of a general or something. Roar! All of a sudden, an inhuman roar sounded from behind the Dragon Fang soldiers. Then, a huge black figure jumped into the camp of the Roman soldiers. Boom! When the black figure landed in the camp of the Roman soldiers, it directly caused a violent impact to the Roman soldiers. Roar! The black figure roared again. It was holding a strange stone axe. It was a 2.5-meter tall figure. Its whole body was naked, and only the lower half of its body was wearing a tattered combat uniform. Its naked body had a healthy dark complexion. Its muscles were bound, and its wrists and ankles were shackled. His eyes were filled with madness. Without a doubt, this was a berserker. If Wuming was here, he would definitely be surprised. This was the berserker that they met in Winterwood City. His real name was Hercules. Hercules was constantly waving his axe and sword as he began to massacre the Roman soldiers. It had to be said that a berserker was indeed a berserker. His destructive power was not to be underestimated. In just a few minutes, more than half of the Roman soldiers were killed or injured. However, since the Dragon Fang soldiers had already sent a general, the Roman soldiers had no choice but to send a general as well. Immediately afterward, a red-eyed man wearing ancient golden Roman armor, a battle skirt, and a tattered red cloak behind him rushed over with a roar. He seemed to be a berserker as well. Ow 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 ow! Roar! The two berserkers roared at each other and began to fight. The Greek berserker swung his huge axe and sword and attacked the Roman berserker. On the other hand, the Roman berserker was not afraid of pain. He carried his axe and sword and attacked the Greek berserker. The two berserkers with similar strength and durability were fighting each other just like that. After a few moves, the Roman berserker was clearly at a disadvantage and was beginning to be suppressed by the Greek berserker. There was no doubt that if there were no reinforcements or something special happened, Rome's berserker would definitely die. Ow 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 ow! The Roman berserker roared unwillingly. Suddenly, a ray of moonlight appeared in the sky and shone around the Roman berserker. That was the Roman berserker's noble phantasm. It could cause mental damage to the enemies in the surrounding area. Roar! It could only be said that Hercules was indeed worthy of his name. Even if he had gone berserk, it could be said that because he had gone berserk, the enemy's noble phantasm had no effect on him. However, the surrounding Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers could not. The Roman soldiers began to go berserk. Kata! The Dragon Fang soldiers also went berserk. Then, the Roman soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers, who were affected by the Roman berserker's noble phantasm, began to attack Hercules crazily. Roar! Ants could even kill an elephant. However, to Hercules, these soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers were not ants. At most, they could only affect Hercules. Hercules crazily crushed these soldiers and Dragon Fang soldiers and began to attack indiscriminately. As long as they were close to him, they would be smashed into pieces by Hercules's axe. However, the Roman berserker was also among them, constantly attacking Hercules. The Roman berserker, who could match Hercules' strength, could cause damage to Hercules with every attack. This was what they meant by ants could kill an elephant. Of course, that referred to Hercules being attacked by the Roman berserker. At that moment, there was a sudden magical fluctuation not far away from the two servants, and the two berserkers could not help but look over there. With a flash of light, two figures appeared in the same place. Reiki transfer normal to Chica. Matthew, you have come to the United States in 1783. Roman's voice came from Gudatsi's wrist. It was Matthew who was wearing Chaldea's master clothes and Galahad's Reiki suit. Doctor, are you sure this is the United States in 1783? Gudatsi and Matthew looked at the battlefield in horror. Was there such a fierce battle in the United States at that time? Coincidentally, Hercules and Rome's berserker were looking at the two unknown enemies who had entered the battlefield. Gudatsi and Matthew could not help but swallow their saliva. It feels like we're finished. Chapter 472. Roar! Ah! Hercules and Rome's berserker roared in unison, as if they were extremely angry at their former enemy who had suddenly entered the battlefield. It's over. That's Hercules and Caligula, Gudatsi shouted in a panic. They were the enemies that Gudatsi and Matthew encountered at the second and third singularities. As if they also had an impression of Gudatsi and Matthew, Hercules and Caligula roared and ran towards the two. "Senior, please step back." Matthew raised his shield and stood in front of Gudatsi. Hercules raised his axe and sword and smashed it down at Matthew. Clang! The sword and axe collided with the holy shield, producing an ear-piercing sound. "Ha!" After blocking Hercules' attack, Matthew shouted and pushed Hercules away. After experiencing 4 singularities, Matthew had indeed become a lot stronger. Hercules was a humanoid Gundam whose strength had reached A+. Even though it was not easy for Matthew to block his full-powered attack, he was still able to do so. "Senior, it's too dangerous here. Prepare to break out of the battlefield," Matthew said to Gudatsi without looking back. Gudatsi was not an idiot. The Dragonfang soldiers and Roman soldiers had begun to surround them. No matter what, they had to leave the battlefield first. When a scholar meets a soldier, it is difficult to reason with him. This was probably the case. No matter which side it was, there was no way to communicate with them at the moment, so it was best to leave now. "Ah!" "Senior!" Matthew shouted and stood in front of Caligula, who wanted to attack Gudatsi. "Doctor, is Miss Pamilia not ready yet?" Gudatsi quickly said to her wrist, while Matthew blocked Caligula. Pamilia was sleeping because of the habits of vampires, so she did not follow Matthew and others. "It's too late, Tachika. Although it's a bit irresponsible to say this now, we can only rely on you and Matthew now." Roman's helpless voice came from the watch. "Ah, really, if only Assassin was here," Gudatsi complained. As if the heavens were playing a joke, a rather huge source of magic was quickly approaching them. It was the power of light, the extreme light that could illuminate all darkness. "Tachika! Matthew! There's a huge source of magic approaching you. It's impossible to determine whether it's an enemy or not. Be careful," Roman said excitedly. "Doctor, we've already seen it here," Gudatsi complained to Roman. In the east of the battlefield, like the rising sun, a fierce light shone and quickly impacted the camps of both sides. Roar dash! "Oh!" Hercules, who was about to attack Gudatsi again, and Caligula, who was blocked by Matthew, both turned their heads and looked at the light. It seems that the two berserkers judged that this light was more to be targeted than the enemy. Hercules and Caligula gave up attacking Gudatsi and Matthew and headed towards the source of the light in the east. "Anyway, we're saved," Gudatsi sighed. However, even without the two threats of Hercules and Caligula, the surrounding Dragonfang soldiers and Roman soldiers were not to be trifled with. Surprisingly, the quality of these two soldiers was quite high. Matthew used his shield to knock away one enemy after another, and quickly said to Gudatsi, "Senior, let's take advantage of this opportunity to break through." Because of Hercules' hammer and Caligula's noble phantasm, the Roman soldiers and Dragonteeth soldiers around Gudatsi and Mashu were not gathered together. Therefore, they were confident to break through the encirclement. "Quick, Matthew, let's leave quickly." Then, Matthew covered Gudatsi and the two broke through to the west. Why break through to the west? What a joke! The light in the east was not to be trifled with. If they didn't hurry to the west, they would be waiting for death. Because of this, Gudatsi and Wuming were getting farther and farther away in the east, where the light was. Silent Wonder held the holy white spear in his hand and destroyed the Roman soldiers and Dragonfang soldiers that were rushing forward as if he was unparalleled. With this level of soldiers, the enemy must have used the Holy Grail, Wuming said while mowing the grass. Although Wuming was mowing the grass, the strength of these Roman soldiers and Dragonfang soldiers was already very high. Wuming had also encountered Dragonfang soldiers, but compared to these Dragonfang soldiers, those Dragonfang soldiers were simply broken bones. Naturally, the Roman soldiers who were comparable to the dragon fangs were also extremely strong. Simply put, the original green monsters with good quality had become orange monsters with epic quality. In any case, they are just mass-produced soldiers. Not to mention the dragon fang soldiers, the Roman soldiers were exactly the same. And there was no fear in them. There was no doubt that they were summoned using the Holy Grail. It was the same as Wu Ming's Celtic soldiers. It's about time. Using normal attacks to clear the monsters was too slow, so Wu Ming prepared to use a skill. Silent wonder swept away all the enemies around him. Then, he pointed the holy lance Yggdrasil downwards and stabbed it into the ground. "Feel the radiance of the Holy King," Wu Ming said as he injected magic into the holy spear. Boom! In an instant, the magic of light was released and overturned the soldiers and the ground, causing a violent explosion. The scorching light purified the enemies and the ground. Wu Ming stood in a large crater that looked like it was hit by a meteorite and pulled out the holy spear that was still stuck in the ground. Holy King's Radiance. Ace, the descent of the Holy King, the radiance of mercy accompanied the Holy King. The effect could be said to be similar to the Ghost Seed Demon's skill. It was a combination of natural demon, strange strength, charm, magic release, and so on. Wu Ming used the effect of the light magic release. It had to be said that the effect was outstanding. Wu Ming's attack just now almost changed the terrain of the northeastern Mississippi plains, and the attacking Roman soldiers and dragon fang soldiers were basically wiped out. Roar! Oh! Suddenly, two different roars were heard, and two figures appeared at the edge of the crater. Is that Hercules and the unknown berserker? Wu Ming knew Hercules because he had met him before. However, Wu Ming really did not know Berserker, who was like an emperor. However, this did not hinder Wu Ming. Both of them did not come with good intentions. Mythical Yggdrasil. Chapter 473. Mythical Yggdrasil. Wu Ming didn't say anything and directly released the true name of the Holy Spear. The originally solid holy spear in his hand seemed to have turned into light, shining with infinite brilliance. Even Hercules and Caligula couldn't help but raise their arms to block the dazzling brilliance. Pure brilliance, holy world tree, help me purify the evil! Wu Ming shouted loudly and threw the aurora pillar in his hand like a javelin at Caligula. After all, Wu Ming didn't know Caligula well and didn't know if he was a strong threat. But Wu Ming knew that Hercules could resurrect 11 times, and he would be immune to all attacks he had received. Therefore, Wu Ming chose to get rid of Caligula, the unknown berserker, first. Ah! The intense pain made Caligula roar. The spear of light hit Caligula's body at a speed that Caligula couldn't react to. It passed through his body and left a glowing hole in his body. Bang! Then, Caligula exploded and overturned Hercules, who didn't have time to leave Caligula's side. This was the power of Wu Ming. No, it should be the light of the Holy King. At this point, the Roman berserker, Caligula, was eliminated. Roar! Hercules got up and roared at Wu Ming. Next, it's your turn. Wu Ming waved his hand and the holy spear that had turned into light returned to Wu Ming's hand and turned into a solid object. It had to be said that Hercules's 12 trials, God Hand, was really powerful. It was even more cheating than Wu Ming who cheated. It was immune to B-level damage and could resurrect 11 times. It had a strong resistance to attacks that killed at once. If the master's aptitude was high and had enough magic, the number of resurrections that were lost could be recovered. Even if Wu Ming was extremely powerful now, he couldn't be sure that he could kill Hercules and make him leave. But, I don't need to kill you. I just need to defeat you, Wu Ming said as he rushed toward Hercules with his spear. Roar! Hercules saw the man in white armor running toward him and roared crazily. After all, Hercules was a demigod hero and could be said to be the most famous hero in Greece. Even if he was a berserker and had lost his mind, he had his own pride. How could Hercules be afraid of his opponent, who was also a berserker, who had unleashed his noble phantasm right from the start? He just looked a little fairer than him, had more mana, and was on par with him in terms of ability value. He just looked a little prettier than him. Roar! I, Hercules, am not afraid. Along with the roar, Hercules jumped up and raised his axe to attack Wuming. Even if Hercules had lost most of his mind, his body's instinct was still there. His instinct allowed Hercules to hit Wuming directly. Dong! There was a small hole in the pit that was originally a big one. The small hole was filled with smoke and dust. Whoosh! A white spear came out of the smoke and swept across. Wuming swept the smoke and dust away. There was not a single speck of dust on his white armor. When Hercules was about to hit him with his sword, Wuming used his holy spear to block it. In addition to his relic, Arthur's gift armor, even without the protection of his holy spear, Wuming did not suffer any damage when Hercules hit him. To put it simply, Wuming's relic was tougher than Hercules's body from the 12 trials. Roar! Perhaps Hercules saw that his attack was ineffective. He roared again and rushed toward Wuming. When Wuming saw Hercules rushing toward him, he reached behind him and grabbed his cloak. He threw the cloak at Hercules. Hercules cut the cloak in half with his sword and axe. The cloak turned into magic particles and drifted away with the wind. Following that, the tip of the spear appeared in front of Hercules. The tip of the spear was aimed at Hercules' head. However, how could it hit Hercules who had mind's eye? Hercules turned his head and easily dodged the attack. Roar! Following that, Hercules roared and swept his sword and axe at Wuming, who was close to him. After Wuming's attack failed, he held the end of the spear and used the holy spear as a pole. He inserted it into the ground behind Hercules. When Hercules' sword and axe swept over, he jumped and came behind Hercules. The surrounding magic instantly gathered and light appeared behind Hercules. Dong! His foot, which contained the magic of light, kicked Hercules from behind. Hercules was kicked to the bottom of the pit by silent sound. After all, both of them were now fighting on the slope of the giant pit. Wuming's kick, coupled with the influence of gravity, caused Hercules to roll toward the center of the giant pit. Wuming took back his leg that was still moving because of the kick. He stood firm and pulled out the holy spear from the ground. Wuming's kick just now had reached the A-level, and it was slightly higher. Even Hercules couldn't withstand this attack. However, although he was injured, it certainly wouldn't have a big impact on the battle. Hercules inserted his sword and axe into the ground on the way to the bottom of the pit. He stopped abruptly and then turned over. Roar! Hercules was even more enraged by Wuming's humiliation of the Greek hero. At this moment, Wuming heard a voice. Phoebus catastrophe, complaint of arrows. Shio 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 shio. In an instant, countless dark green arrows wrapped in strong magic power came down from the sky, and the arrow formation fell straight towards Silent Wonder. Boom boom boom. Wuming was buried by the arrow formation. The smoke produced by the arrow formation filled the big pit. Then, a spaceship appeared in the air. As the name suggested, it was a spaceship. It was a gorgeous sailboat that flew into the sky. A green figure stood on the bow, still in the posture of drawing a bow. After seeing her noble phantasm hit Wuming, Atlantis spoke. Come back, Hercules, Atlantis said to Hercules in a steady tone that was neither commanding nor pleading. Roar! Although Hercules did not listen to the words of the Greek Holy Grail holder when he was summoned, Hercules would still listen to Atlanta a little. Immediately, Hercules jumped onto the spaceship. Then, Atlanta looked at the place where the smoke was gradually dissipating. Although Atlanta's noble phantasm was a B-level, for Wuming who could even block Hercules' attack, each arrow alone could not threaten him at all. Even if Atlanta deliberately concentrated the arrows, it was estimated that it would not cause any harm to Wu-ming. This was indeed the case. When the smoke was completely dispersed, Wu-ming's spotless figure was still standing in the big pit that was almost destroyed. "Such a familiar noble phantasm, I guessed it must be you," Wu-ming said lightly. Chapter 474. Although Wu-ming's voice was not loud, Atlanta, who had a particularly good hearing, still heard it. "I don't know you, Celtic hero." Atlanta held the heavenly bow blessed by Artemis and aimed at Wu-ming again. Although Atlanta kept saying that she didn't know Wu-ming, Wu-ming remembered Atlanta, and there was a reason why Atlanta didn't know Wu-ming. Servants were the avatars of heroic spirits, and each avatar was different. To put it simply, the main body was divided into many avatars, and what you know is just one of the avatars. Therefore, if you thought that you had met a servant in the Holy Grail War, you would be wrong to think that he or she knew you and befriended you when you saw him or her in other places. In the next second, he or she is likely to kill you because he or she is not the first avatar that you know. He or she may be the second avatar, the third avatar, or even the infinite avatar. Therefore, the current Atlanta was probably not the Atlanta of the 14 Horsemen, but there was another possibility. Wu-ming was now fully armed and his face was covered. Atlanta may have said that she didn't know him because she couldn't see Wu-ming's face. In any case, even if Atlanta knew Wu-ming, the two of them among the 14 Horsemen were opponents. In addition, Wu-ming hadn't figured out the situation of the spaceship yet. Wu-ming didn't think that Atlanta could come to his side. "Unfortunately, I know you." Wu-ming's slightly helpless voice came from under the armor. Wu-ming began to be vigilant. His fingers slid, and the defensive Lune rune appeared and attached to Wu-ming's armor. Atlanta's strength was quite low, but the heavenly bow blessed by moon god Artemis, when the arrow was fully drawn, the damage had reached A class, which meant that it could hurt Hercules. However, Wu-ming's armor could defend against A-class physical attack. It stood to reason that Atlanta couldn't hurt Wu-ming. But in case there were other servants on the ship who were ready to attack Wu-ming, then the probability of Wu-ming capsizing would be high. At that moment, a disgusting voice came from the ship, as if that person was a scum. "What are you doing? Atlanta, why don't you shoot the arrow?" Although he couldn't see the person, Wu-ming could be sure that the owner of the voice was not a good person. From Atlanta's frowns' face. "With all due respect, Ison, our original plan was to retreat after retrieving Hercules." Atlanta did not put down the heavenly bow, nor did she shoot an arrow at Silent Cry. Instead, she said without looking back. Hearing this name Atlanta of S people who knew a little about Greek mythology should know the story of the Argo hero ship. It was an adventure ship that gathered many Greek heroes, including Hercules and Atlanta, to search for the Golden Fleece. However, many people might not know but it was not wrong. In Greek mythology was not very famous. It was because he was the captain and initiator of the Argo hero ship that had a little fame. He was arrogant and domineering, proud and naive, easy to be deceived. He successfully regained the throne by relying on the power of Demetrius, whom he had swindled. After marriage, he abandoned Demetrius. As a result, Demetrius took revenge on him. In the end, because of the curse of the goddess of beauty Aphrodite, he was killed by the heavy wood that fell from the Argo hero ship. In this way, this ship must be the Argo hero ship. Hercules, Atlanta, and on the ship were the best proof. "Tisk, you woman!" Ison's angry voice rang out. Because the ship stopped above Wu-ming's head, Wu-ming could not see or anyone else on the ship. He could only see Atlanta standing on the side of the ship. Of course, even so, Wu-ming could not appreciate the scenery under Atlanta's skirt. After all, the angle was not quite right. Cough cough. Immediately afterward, Atlanta jumped back to the ship, and the Argo hero ship immediately moved and began to drive toward the location of the Great Lakes in the north. Want to go? Ask for my gun first. Wu Ming said as he swung his gun and was ready to release his noble phantasm again. The bottom of the Argo hero ship and Wu Ming's light gun, which one was more powerful? Probably everyone knew that, and the servants on the Argo hero ship naturally understood this truth. As a result, countless magic circles appeared around the Argo hero ship in a composite form, and then, the magic circles began to gather energy. Judging by the concentration of magic, Wu Ming judged that the power of these magic circles was not small. Although it was not as powerful as a noble phantasm, it was enough to cause damage to Wu Ming. It seemed that the magician on the Argo hero ship had already begun to chant, otherwise, there would not be so many powerful magic circles appearing in an instant. And the target of these magic circles was naturally Wu Ming. In the blink of an eye, the mana in the magic array finished gathering and fired at Silent Wonder. Like a heavy downpour, countless mana pillars that could melt steel poured down from the sky. Boom! Damn! The explosion caused by the mana pillar deepened the crater even further. Then, a light gun flew out of the center of the explosion. Mythical Yggdrasil. Boom! The light gun directly hit the Argo hero ship, penetrating through the bottom of the ship and coming out from the deck, blasting a big hole in the bottom of the ship. The Argo hero ship started to smoke as if it had been shot. Then, Ison's panicked screams came from the Argo hero ship. My ship! Quick, quick! Quick, quick, quick! Demetrius, quickly use spatial magic. Then, the entire ship disappeared. Without a doubt, the Argo hero ship had been transported away by Demetrius, who Ison was talking about. Demetrius. That means these magic circles were all created by her, and those Dragonfang soldiers were probably created by her too. Wu Ming's voice came from the center of the explosion. Gradually, the explosion dissipated, and Wu Ming's figure was revealed in the pit that had become even deeper. His armor was still spotless. Wu Ming waved his hand, and the holy spear returned to his hand. That spatial magic was probably set up on the Argo hero ship in advance as a precaution. After all, using spatial magic to transport such a large ship was absolutely impossible. Then, Wu Ming sensed the reaction of the servants around him, and said lightly, "Using the defensive loon magic in advance is really the right choice." After all, after Atlanta used her noble phantasm, Wu Ming cast a defensive loon rune on himself because he was afraid that there would be more powerful attacks. Otherwise, Wu Ming would be injured by Demetrius's magic, even with the noble phantasm Arthur's gift. If he was injured, it would be a bit difficult to deal with the new servants. Immediately, Wu Ming looked at the edge of the giant pit, and 4 servants appeared. Chapter 475. What a spectacular scene! A fat man dressed in red and yellow said leisurely, just like an emperor, "Caesar Sama, I just received a message from the god ancestor. Caligula has left the battlefield." A woman wearing an ancient blue dress next to the fat man said, "Ah, I know, Cleopatra, then, the murderer must be this king." Caesar said, looking at Wu Ming. The holy white armor, the holy spear, whether it was Caesar or Cleopatra, they didn't think that the enemy was easy to deal with. The scene of Wu Ming piercing Argo's noble phantasm was still in their minds. However, these two are not easy to deal with. As he spoke, Caesar glanced at the red-haired young arrogant king and the black-haired frivolous swordsman with his small eyes that appeared to be too fat. "Ceto. The rest of Ceto. Ceto's aura is here. Damn it. Those Greek hyenas, I will never let you go." The young king roared angrily. "Well, he doesn't look easy to deal with now." Caesar smiled and waved his hand. "Oh, Celander, I didn't expect you to descend in this way. I thought Maeve would use the Holy Grail to distort you into the Mad King." The frivolous black-haired man greeted Wu Ming, then jumped into the huge pit with his huge spiral sword. Fergus, were you also summoned by Maeve? Wooming calmly looked at his old friend who was killed by Gil in Winterwood City. Not to mention that he still couldn't remember what happened in Fuyuki City. Moreover, the Celtic warriors weren't people that could be held on to by trivial matters. Let's not talk about this for now. The two over there are servants from Rome, and the one on the other side is the hero of India, Rama. Let's talk about the details later, Fergus said and retreated behind Wooming. Looking at the fresh wound on Fergus' chest, there was no doubt that Fergus was seriously injured. Don't look at how frivolous Fergus' words were. He was already at his limit. The wound extended from his left shoulder to his right abdomen. Although the bleeding had temporarily stopped, Fergus probably wouldn't be able to fight anymore. Then go back to Washington. You'll just be a burden if you stay here, Wooming said without looking back. Then I'll leave it to you. Fergus smiled and left while whistling. Wooming first looked at Caesar and Cleopatra before looking at the red-haired Rama. The name Rama reminded Wooming of the last king of the god-slayers, who was also Rama. The two of them were the Rama of their respective worlds, but they would not have any connection. You're a Celtic too, right? In that case, you are also responsible for what happened to Ceto. Bear it properly for me. Rama shouted furiously as he raised the undying blade in his hand. Brahmastra, indestructible Rakshasa. After activating his noble phantasm, Rama threw the undying blade at Wooming. Among them, the lightning and flame on the undying blade made Wooming nervous. According to the type, Rama's indestructible Rakshasa, was a magic noble phantasm, but that didn't mean that magic noble phantasm couldn't attack non-magic. And in terms of level, Rama's indestructible Rakshasa, 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 was an A+ noble phantasm. This made Wooming curse in his heart, what the F***ck, even if Wooming had the noble phantasm Arthur's gift and the Loon defense rune, Wooming wouldn't dare to take that attack head-on. What if I hang up? Wooming didn't have any powerful defensive noble phantasm or defensive ability, so Wooming used the skill Holy King's Glory. Wooming crazily squeezed the magical power in his body. In an instant, endless light shone from Wooming's body. Even Caesar and Crowbart, who were servants, couldn't bear the light and directly raised their arms. And Rama was the same. Of course, Wooming didn't intend to use this skill to resist, but to use magical power to release it. The legend of the Holy King, Holy King. Rama raised the Holy Lance, and with the magical power provided by Wooming that was equivalent to 3 noble phantasms, the Holy Lance turned into a huge light cannon. Then, Wooming threw it heavily. Boom! Rumble! When the indestructible blade came into contact with the light cannon, there was silence at first. Then, there was an explosion. The aftermath of the explosion was comparable to that of a nuclear bomb. Caesar, Cleopatra, and Rama were blown away. Even Fergus, who had just walked a short distance away, was affected. However, even though Fergus had walked a long distance away from the big pit, he was still affected by the explosion. It was enough to see the power of Wooming's noble phantasm. Fergus inserted the neon sword deep into the ground, and held the hilt with difficulty to prevent it from being blown away. After about 10 seconds the storm stopped. Well, Celander is too reckless. Even if he has a lot of magical power, he can't do whatever he wants. Although he complained, Fergus had a smile on his face. After all, the Celtics were considered a fighting race. Fergus looked at the area behind him, as if it was swallowed by the explosion. The whole big pit could no longer be seen because it was all white. Well, I'm injured, I'll let him do it himself. After that, Fergus carried his spiral sword and walked toward Washington. After a long time, the white substance dissipated, and a barren plain was revealed under the sky. Why was it a plain? Because the explosion directly dug out a piece of the area. In short, it was actually a flat basin. That was the trump card of a servant, the power of a noble phantasm, which was powerful enough to change the terrain. Of course, to be able to turn the surrounding hundreds of hectares of plain into a basin was not something that could be done casually by a servant. At least, Fergus could not do it. At most, he could only scorch the land in front of him that was tens of thousands of meters long and thousands of meters wide. At that moment, a white hand suddenly stretched out from the ground of the basin. Taking a closer look, it was not a white hand. It was obviously a white gauntlet with a white gauntlet. Wuming climbed out of the ground. The white armor was slightly dim at the moment. Wuming supported his body with the holy lance and looked around. This holy king's body is a bit scary. I just used 3 times more mana to supply the noble phantasm, plus a super strong mana release, and the explosion was so amazing. Well, ordinary servants would be drained of their mana in an instant if they did that. Only Wuming, who had a special ability, dared to do that. Mana amplification. EX, the perfect attribute of the root dragon. No matter what class, the root dragon's mana was almost unlimited, and it was not affected by the class. Because of his almost limitless magic, coupled with his cheat code and Maeve's use of the Holy Grail, Silent Cry has really become able to do whatever he wants. Rama, Caesar, and the others, I'm afraid they would have been blown away. Because Wuming was in the center of the big pit, Wuming was buried underground. Rama and the others, who were at the edge of the big pit, were unlikely to be buried underground. It was very likely that they would have been blown away. Forget it, let's leave it at that for the time being. The information collection is almost done. After that, Wuming also began to move toward Washington. Good heavens, so the reason for this nuclear flattening was to gather intelligence. Chapter 476. Logically speaking, there should be a lot of local residents around the basin that was turned from a plain to a nuclear flattened. However, the surrounding area was subconsciously identified as a battlefield by Greece and Rome. Therefore, the local residents in this area were evacuated by Greece and Rome. Both Greece and Rome set up capital cities in their respective territories and gathered the people as if they were establishing a country. The people, on the other hand, chose a side to join in order to protect themselves. It's really beyond my expectations. I thought they wouldn't care about the life and death of the local resident. Wuming sat in the president's seat and casually flipped through the information collected by Maeve after Wuming left. At this moment, Wuming's originally battered armor was restored to its holy state. There was no doubt that Maeve directly used a command spell to restore Wuming to his full state. This is not surprising. After all, both sides have similar leaders. Maeve stood behind Wuming and said with a smile while hugging Wuming's neck. Rome's words were still understandable. After all, it was Caligula and Caesar. It was normal for them to build a city. On the other hand, Greece was more than happy to play the king's game. After all, Greece had Jason. That guy used women for revenge. If you use them, then so be it. After becoming a king, marry her and live an honest life, but in the end, you abandoned her. Although both sides had leaders, neither Wuming nor Maeve would agree with such a man. There are also residents in our territory, right? Wuming continued to look at the information and said to Maeve without looking back. That's right, because Sai became the Holy King, the original plan to kill everything was cancelled. Maeve said calmly. She didn't find it strange that she said to kill everything. After Maeve occupied Washington, or rather, after occupying half of the United States, before she could do anything to the local residents, the other Holy Grail forces came and divided the United States, which was originally divided into 2 parts, into 5 parts. Maeve then retreated to Washington. After that, Maeve decided to establish her capital in Washington. She was no longer in the mood to kill. A few days later, Maeve summoned Wuming. After that, because of the Holy King's reputation, my Fu also changed her policies. She started to treat it like a country and no longer had any bad intentions. Only the Holy Grail faction that occupied the Rocky Mountains had no intention of building a city there. The Rocky Mountains were already lacking in population. As a result, a small portion of the population migrated to Greece and Rome. Of course, the westernmost force of the United States, the Lionhead, represented the United States from the very beginning. If it were not for the Rocky Mountains, the people of the American continent would have run over to the Lionhead. Now, regardless of whether they were forced or not, the natives were living in the Celtic territory. After all, as long as Little Sai wants to do something, I will accompany you. If you become the wise Mad King, I will become your bloody queen. I will fight alongside you. If you become the Holy King, I will become your Holy Queen. I will rule the kingdom with you. That is my wish. I will accompany you until the day I die. Maeve's usual charm was gone. At this moment, she was really like an ordinary girl accompanying her sweetheart. She hugged Wu-Ming gently. When he was summoned by the Holy Grail, Wu-Ming heard Maeve's wish. Not a king who can kill with me, but a king who can make me accompany you. Wu-Ming fell silent. What man would reject a girl who was willing to do anything for him? Indeed, Wu-Ming's initial interest in Maeve was not because he coveted Maeve's beauty. It was because he was a greenhorn and could not help but be interested in the things around him. Wu-Ming had just changed from an ordinary person to the identity of the root dragon. He had also learned from Skaha. When he went out to Connaught, it was a pity that he did not see Maeve, who had played all the Celtic heroes in the palm of her hand. After all, he was young and frivolous. The reason why Maeve fell in love with Wu-Ming was not only because of his heroic act of saving the damsel in distress, but also because Wu-Ming ignored Maeve's charm. Maeve's beautiful body made her every move full of charm, and Wu-Ming resisted Maeve's charm because of his powerful mental strength as the root dragon. Because of these two things, Maeve became interested in Wu-Ming. At first, her love was indeed to play Wu-Ming in the palm of her hand, but the real love was to accompany Wu-Ming in the future. Wu-Ming stayed by my Fu's side and learned about my Fu's past. Even if her body was full of charm, which girl was not innocent after birth? Maeve also had an unforgettable past to become like this. Whether it was pity for Maeve or indignation for Maeve's experience, Wu-Ming stayed by Maeve's side and treated her as a younger sister who lacked love. Yes, Wu-Ming only treated Maeve as a younger sister who needed to be doted on. The world always thought that Maeve played men in the palm of her hand, but Maeve had never received true love. Whether it was the love between family members, friends, or romantic love, Maeve had never had any of them. It had to be said that Maeve's true love for Wu-Ming could be felt by Wu-Ming. He was not a straight man, so why didn't Wu-Ming accept it? The name of the root dragon was not an ordinary name. Ever since Wu-Ming accepted his fate and left his original world to come to this moon, he knew that he would definitely not be ordinary in the future. And Square was often accompanied by danger. Before he obtained enough power to protect the people he wanted to protect, Wu-Ming did not consider himself to be a burden. That's right, in the beginning, because Wu-Ming did not activate the power of his bloodline, it was a little difficult for him to protect himself. Therefore, a lover was indeed a burden to Wu-Ming. Wu-Ming was able to leave the square world that he had lived in for more than 10 years without hesitation because he considered his own extraordinariness, because extraordinariness would also bring trouble. And now, facing such a Maeve, Wu-Ming felt that he could already consider these things. Hey Maeve, after I'm done with my business, I'll take your original body to my house. How about that? Wu-Ming said in a flat tone. While speaking, Wu-Ming put down the information in his hand and leaned back, closer to Maeve. It's time to make some promises. After hearing Wu-Ming's words, Maeve's body suddenly trembled. Although Wu-Ming was wearing armor, Wu-Ming could still feel the change in Maeve. Well, I'll wait for that day. No matter how long it takes, I'll wait for you on the Seat of Heroes, waiting for you to pick me up." Maeve hugged Wuming's arm tightly and said with a happy face. The sun shone in from the window, shining on the pure white couple and blessing them. Chapter 477. Although it was heartwarming, Wuming did not want to reveal his innocence here. Then, the two of them began to discuss Rama, who hated the Celts, and Fergus, who was injured. "So, you think Cedo is useful, so you asked Fergus to go to Alcatraz Island to transport Cedo, who has been captured a long time ago. In the end, Rama and the Argo, who were following Rama, were attracted?" Wuming said calmly. As everyone knew, the American continent was huge, so was the United States. Therefore, the territories were not as strictly divided as Wuming had seen from the map. For example, the mountainous plains between the Rocky Mountains and the Great Lakes were unoccupied. The Celts were in the easternmost area, while the Greeks and Romans were in the western plains not far from the Appalachian Mountains. The Holy Grail forces in the Rocky Mountains did not make any moves at all. As for the Lion Head forces, they were temporarily resting in the westernmost area as they could not defeat the other forces. The Missouri River flowed through that area and the terrain was not too high. The Green Holy Grail forces were mainly in the southern part of the Rocky Mountains. Therefore, that area was the largest unoccupied land. Many of the native residents had formed a rebel army. It was said that they were led by a single follower. That was why they could be active in this continent. If the territories were as strictly divided as Wuming had seen on the map, how could there be a rebel army? They would have been suppressed by these forces long ago. All in all, the westernmost Alcatraz Island belonged to the easternmost Celts. There was nothing wrong with that. Ahem. Let's not talk about that for now. According to Maeve, she was preparing to withdraw Beowulf, who was stationed in Alcatraz Island. Therefore, she sent Fergus to meet him. In the end, because Rama had a special skill that allowed him to sense Cedo, Rama intercepted Beowulf and Fergus halfway. For the sake of his beloved woman, the hero Rama sneaked up on Beowulf and threw out a noble relic. He almost killed Beowulf and severely injured him. Fortunately, Cedo was escorted by Wuming's soldiers at the back. Otherwise, Rama's noble relic could have killed Cedo. However, if Cedo was beside Beowulf and Fergus, Rama would not be able to throw out his noble artifact. Afterward, when Fergus and Romo were fighting, Cedo was taken away by the crew of the Argo led by Aeson. They also killed Beowulf while they were at it. Atlanta was more than enough to deal with a heavily injured Beowulf, not to mention that there was also the god-magician Demetrius. Then, Rama, who was enraged once again, used his spiritual base and used another relic to injure Fergus. He then began to chase after Argo. Although it was called an injury, Fergus was almost done for. Rama had overdrawn his spiritual base to release the relic. Perhaps, when Rama was fighting Wuming, he had also overdrawn his spiritual base to use the relic. As a lone servant, although Rama was summoned by the Holy Grail, the Holy Grail could only maintain Rama's current realm. It was impossible for it to provide unlimited mana. Almost all the other servants were the same. It seemed that only Wuming had a master, and that was Maeve. He couldn't see the command seal because Maeve was wearing a white silk glove that blocked the command seal. After that, Fergus needed to return to Washington, so he followed Rama on the way. When they passed through Rome's sphere of influence, Caesar and Cleopatra, who attracted attention, appeared. The two of them watched Rama chase after the Argo, and Fergus chased Rama. With the mentality of watching a good show and supporting Caligula, the two of them followed. As a result, the scene when Wuming saw the four servants gathered in the big pit appeared. However, unfortunately, Caligula had already been killed by Wuming, and the good show that they wanted to watch had turned into a bad one. If that's the case, Rama should be dying now. At present, they only knew that Rama had overdrawn his mana and spiritual base to release his noble artifact twice. Before that, they couldn't deny whether Rama had overdrawn his mana or not. Coupled with the constant running in this huge American continent, he had consumed a lot of mana. Not to mention, my noble artifact and Rama's noble artifact exploded. The explosion wasn't far from Rama, so he must have been affected. Wuming was only affected by the explosion, but the armor on his body was dimmed, and he still needed Maeve to use a command seal to restore it. Rama, who had no armor, overdrawn his mana, and unstable spiritual base, was even worse. Maybe he has already left. If that's the case, my plan to unify the continent will be one step closer. After all, if Wuming wanted to unify the American continent, Wuming, who had become enemies with Rama, would definitely be troubled by Rama, the great hero of India. Wuming's people had kidnapped Rama's wife. Now that Wuming had accepted the identity of the Celtic king, he had to shoulder this responsibility. Yeah, the hatred of stealing my wife is irreconcilable. I have to unify the continent as soon as possible, Wuming said in a serious tone. Wuming and Maeve had already planned it out. Wuming's goal was to restore the singularity, so he had to collect the Holy Grail of the singularity. There were a total of 4 Holy Grails: the Celtic king, the Greek king, the Roman king, and the Holy Grail king who was still unknown. Wuming, who was the Celtic king, could be said to have one less enemy. After all, Maeve, who had the Holy Grail, was one of his people. Therefore, he had to deal with the other forces. Of course, Lionhead's native force in the United States did not have the Holy Grail, so he did not have to categorize it as an enemy for the time being. Therefore, Wuming set a small goal for himself, which was to unify the United States, collect the Holy Grail, and complete the restoration of humanity. However, Lionhead can also work with him. After all, both of them have the same goal, Wuming analyzed. Lionhead's goal must be to restore the United States, and Wuming's goal was to collect the Holy Grail, so he needed to unify the country. In that case, the two sides could work together. But before the other 3 forces came to this singularity, we and Lionhead were mortal enemies. I'm afraid it's not that easy to bury the hatchet, Maeve said. That's right, mortal enemies would not easily unite just because of an additional enemy. It was not that easy. That's true, Wuming said in a deep voice. Then, Wuming thought of Gudatsi. I don't know if Tachika and the others came to this singularity. If they had the help of Chaldea's master, it would be a great help to collect the Holy Grail. After all, the reason why those followers were alone was because they were summoned by the Holy Grail. They helped Chaldea's master to take back the source of the singularity. After all, the singularity was caused by the followers with their own private wishes, so it was impossible to talk about it. By the way, in Celtic, besides you, me, Fergus, and Beowulf, are there any other followers? Wuming suddenly said to Maeve. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.